I'll never forget the moment my father destroyed me at Christmas dinner. With a smile on his face and turkey on his plate, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Crystal, I know you paid off the $720,000 mortgage to save this house, but we've decided to give it to your sister Emily as her graduation gift." The room went silent. My heart stopped. I'd sacrificed everything, worked 3 jobs, lived in a studio apartment, ate ramen for months to save my family from losing their home, and this was my thanks. But then it got worse. "Oh, and Emily doesn't want you at her graduation party," he added casually, like he was discussing the weather. "She thinks you'd bring negative energy." 20 years of being the forgotten daughter, the unwanted child, the family scapegoat. It all crystallized in that moment. They'd finally pushed me too far. I turned to my Aunt Martha, the only person who'd ever truly loved me, and asked loud enough for everyone to hear, "Do you want to tell them what we know? Or should I?" My father's face went white. My sister froze. Because they had no idea what I'd discovered. They didn't know about the $2.3 million trust fund my late mother left me that they'd stolen and hidden for 20 years. They didn't know I'd been building a case against them for months. They didn't know whose name was really on that house deed. And they definitely didn't know what was going to happen at Emily's precious graduation party in 3 days. What happened next became the most satisfying revenge of my entire life. And before this story ends, you'll see a family of liars brought to their knees, a golden child's world shatter on camera, and a woman who was supposed to stay silent. Finally, roar. This is the story of how I took back everything they stole from me. My name is Crystal Robbins. I'm 38 years old, a financial analyst and investment consultant who built a successful career from absolutely nothing. 20 years ago, I left my family's house with 2 suitcases and a heart full of wounds, and I haven't looked back since until tonight. The December cold bit at my face as I stood on the front porch of my childhood home, my hand hovering over the doorbell. I'd almost turned around 3 times during the drive here, almost convinced myself that spending Christmas alone in my apartment with takeout and a good book would be better than this. But Aunt Martha had begged me to come, her voice trembling with something I couldn't quite name over the phone. "Please, sweetheart. Just this once. It's important." So here I was dressed in my best cashmere sweater and pearls armor against a battlefield I'd hoped to never revisit. The door swung open before I could ring and my father stood there, Richard Robbins. 65, silver-haired, and still carrying himself with that entitled posture that said he'd never questioned his place in the world. "Crystal," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You came." "Aunt Martha asked me to." I didn't bother pretending this was about him. He stepped aside without another word, and I walked into the house that had never felt like home. The living room looked exactly as I remembered, same floral couch, same family photos on the mantel, though I noticed my pictures had been relegated to the back, while Emily's achievements took center stage. My younger sister had apparently won some marketing award last year. Good for her. The dining room was already full. My stepmother Linda fussed over the turkey, her movements sharp and nervous. Emily sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up when I entered. At 25, she'd inherited our father's sense of entitlement and our stepmother's ability to look through people she deemed unimportant. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the other seats, their conversations stopping awkwardly when they noticed me. Only Aunt Martha stood up, her weathered face breaking into a genuine smile as she pulled me into a tight hug. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm so glad you're here." Something in her embrace felt desperate protective. I pulled back and searched her eyes, seeing worry and what looked almost like guilt swimming there. "Aunt Martha," I asked quietly. She squeezed my hand. "Later," she mouthed, glancing nervously at my father. Dinner began with forced cheerfulness. Linda had outdone herself with the spread turkey ham, 3 kinds of potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce from scratch. Everything looked perfect, like a magazine photo. I picked at my food, making polite conversation with cousins I hadn't seen in years, answering their obligatory questions about my life with vague pleasantries. Yes, work was going well. No, I wasn't seeing anyone. Yes, I still lived downtown. Nobody asked about the mortgage. Nobody thanked me for saving this house this Christmas, this family from complete financial ruin 8 months ago. I hadn't expected gratitude, but the silence around my sacrifice was deafening. Then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, my father cleared his throat. The table quieted. He had that look on his face, the one that meant he was about to make an announcement he considered important. "Before we have pie," he began cutting into his turkey with precise movements. "I wanted to share some exciting news about Emily's upcoming graduation." My sister perked up, a smug smile playing at her lips. I felt my stomach tighten. "As you all know, Emily is graduating from State University this May with her marketing degree." Murmurs of congratulations rippled around the table. Linda and I are very proud of her accomplishments. I gripped my fork tighter, waiting. "We've been thinking about what would be an appropriate gift for such an important milestone." He paused, took a sip of wine, and then looked directly at me for the first time all evening. "Crystal, I know you paid off the mortgage on this house. $720,000. That was generous of you." The table went completely silent. Every eye turned to me. I stopped breathing. "But Linda and I have decided that this house, this family home, should go to Emily as her graduation present. She's earned it with her hard work and dedication to this family." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt dizzy, like the room was tilting. I'd worked 3 jobs to save that money. Lived in a studio apartment barely big enough for a bed. Ate ramen and rice for months. Sacrificed everything to keep my family from losing their home. And this was how he announced they were giving it to my sister. Not even as a thank you to me first, but as if my sacrifice was just expected. "Dad?" Emily's voice cut through my shock. She was smiling. Actually, smiling. "Really, the whole house. The whole house, sweetheart. You've been such a wonderful daughter. You deserve it." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely. 20 years of being second best, of being forgotten, of being treated like an obligation rather than a daughter, it all crystallized in this single moment. But my father wasn't done. He dabbed his napkin at his mouth and added almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and Emily mentioned she'd prefer if you didn't attend her graduation party, Crystal. She thinks it might be better, less tension, you know. She doesn't want any negative energy on her special day." The room became a vacuum. Someone dropped a fork. I heard Aunt Martha's sharp intake of breath. My stepmother stared at her plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Emily had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but she didn't contradict him. My hands were shaking. 20 years I'd been away from this family, built a life without them, convinced myself I didn't need their love or approval. And in less than 2 minutes, my father had managed to reduce me to that scared, unwanted teenager again. The daughter who was never quite good enough. The child they tolerated rather than treasured. But then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was 2 decades of therapy finally clicking into place. Maybe it was just that I'd finally completely run out of patience for being treated like garbage by people who should have loved me. I felt my face arrange itself into something calm, cold. I turned slowly to Aunt Martha, who was watching me with tears in her eyes and something else, anticipation maybe, hope. "Aunt Martha," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Every eye at the table swiveled between us. "Do you want to tell them what we know? Or should I?" My father's face drained of color. My sister stopped smiling. And for the first time in 20 years, I had their complete, undivided attention. The reaction was instantaneous. My father's face went from pale to red in seconds. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice sharp with something that sounded like panic. Emily looked between us, confusion replacing her earlier smugness. Linda's hands froze over the cranberry sauce. Aunt Martha stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Richard, I think it's time." Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling. "Past time, actually." "Martha, don't you dare," my father started, but she cut him off with a look I'd never seen her use before. Authority, defiance. "Crystal, come with me. Now." She gripped my elbow and guided me toward the hallway that led to the guest bedroom, away from the chaos erupting at the dinner table. Behind us, I heard my father's chair scrape back, heard Linda's sharp whisper of, "What is she talking about?" and Emily's whiny, "Someone tell me what's going on." Martha pulled me into the small guest room and shut the door, pressing her back against it as if physically holding back the storm. Her chest heaved with rapid breaths, and when she looked at me, I saw 20 years of burden in her eyes. "I should have told you years ago," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was a coward. I told myself I was waiting for the right time, but really I was just scared of tearing this family apart." She moved to the bed and pulled out a worn leather satchel from underneath it. Her hands shook as she unzipped it. "But after what he just did to you in there, after watching them treat you like garbage for your entire life, I can't keep quiet anymore." "Aunt Martha, what is this?" My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She pulled out a stack of papers yellowed with age, some in protective sleeves. Bank statements, legal documents with official seals, letters in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Your mother, your real mother. Sarah, she didn't just die and leave you nothing, sweetheart. She made sure you'd be taken care of. She set up a trust fund, a substantial one." The room tilted. "What? $2.3 million, Crystal. She put it in a trust for you to receive when you turned 21. Martha's eyes filled with tears. "But you never got it, did you? You never even knew it existed." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. $2.3 million. While I was working myself to exhaustion, eating ramen, struggling to pay for community college. Where I started, but Martha was already nodding, reading my mind. "Your father and Linda. They hid it from you, used it themselves. Forged documents to access it made it look like you'd waived your rights when you turned 21. She pressed a bank statement into my hands. I saw my mother's name, saw the account balances, saw transfers going out month after month to accounts belonging to Richard and Linda Robbins. "I found these 5 years ago when I was helping your father clean out his office after his surgery. He'd hidden them in an old filing cabinet he thought he was throwing away. I made copies of everything before he realized what I had." "Why didn't you tell me then?" The words came out harsher than I intended, but Martha didn't flinch. "Because I was afraid they'd destroy the originals if they knew I had copies. I needed to wait until the right moment when you were strong enough to fight them." She gripped my shoulders. "And sweetheart, there's more. This house, it was purchased partially with your trust fund money. Your mother wanted to make sure you'd always have a home." The pieces were clicking together in my head, forming a picture so ugly I wanted to look away. "They stole from me," I said slowly. "For 20 years, they stole from me." "Yes," Martha's voice was barely audible. "And they've been planning to give away what's rightfully yours, like it's nothing more than a graduation gift." I looked down at the documents in my hands at proof of betrayal deeper than I'd imagined. My whole childhood, every struggle, every moment, I'd felt like I wasn't enough. It had all been built on lies and theft. Martha watched me carefully, waiting. Then she whispered, "They don't know they've finally pushed you past your breaking point, do they?" I looked up at her and felt something cold and certain settle in my chest. "No," I said quietly. "They have no idea what's coming." Standing there in Aunt Martha's guest room, holding evidence of decades of theft, my mind began pulling up memories I'd spent 20 years trying to bury. Each document in my hands was a key unlocking doors I'd sealed shut for my own survival. But now, knowing the truth about the stolen trust fund, every childhood memory took on a darker meaning. They hadn't just been cruel. They'd been covering their tracks. I was 7 years old the first time I understood I was different from Emily. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd been up since dawn doing the breakfast dishes, sweeping the kitchen floor, folding laundry from the dryer. My hands were red and pruned from the hot water. Through the doorway, I could see Emily sprawled on the couch in her pajamas, watching cartoons, a bowl of cereal balanced on her stomach. When I finished my chores and asked if I could watch TV too, my father looked at me with irritation and said, "Crystal, the bathroom needs cleaning. Emily's had a busy week at school." Emily was 5 years old. What busy week could she possibly have had? That became the pattern of my entire childhood. I was the unpaid housekeeper, the built-in babysitter, the child whose needs were always secondary to Emily's wants. I remember my 10th birthday. I'd been so excited because my father had promised we'd go to the science museum I'd been begging to visit for months. I'd gotten straight A's all semester, won a school science fair, done everything right. But the morning of my birthday, Emily woke up with a headache. Just a headache. Not even a fever. My father canceled the museum trip and told me to be quiet because Emily needed rest. We spent my birthday in silence while Emily napped. There was no makeup trip, no apology, just a grocery store cake that night and my father saying, "10 isn't that important anyway. Wait until you're 13. When I turned 13, he forgot my birthday entirely. Emily got the master bedroom that year because she needed more space for all her activities. I moved into what had essentially been a storage closet. But Emily, when she turned 13, had a catered party with 50 guests, a DJ, and a professional photographer. The academic dismissal was even more painful because school was the one place I thought I could prove my worth. I threw myself into my studies with desperate intensity, believing that if I was just smart enough, accomplished enough, maybe my parents would finally see me as valuable. I made honor roll every semester from 6th grade through high school. My father's response each time was the same, "That's what we expect from you, Crystal. It's not special." But when Emily barely scraped through basic algebra in 9th grade with a C-, they took her out to her favorite restaurant and told everyone at church how proud they were that she was finally applying herself. I joined the debate team and won regional competitions. My parents never came to a single meet, always had some excuse about work or Emily's soccer games. Emily's soccer games, by the way, where she mostly sat on the bench and played maybe 5 minutes per match. They never missed one. They had a whole wall of photos in the hallway dedicated to Emily in her soccer uniform. My debate trophies stayed in a cardboard box under my bed because there was no room on the shelves. When I was named valedictorian of my junior class, I ran home so excited I could barely breathe. I burst into the kitchen where my parents were having coffee and announced my achievement. My father glanced up from his newspaper and said, "Well, you don't have much competition in that school anyway." My stepmother added, "Don't let it go to your head. Pride comes before a fall." Then they went back to discussing Emily's upcoming dance recital, where she had a 3-minute solo they'd been talking about for weeks. I learned to stop sharing my accomplishments, learned to stop expecting acknowledgement, built walls around the parts of me that still hoped for their love, because every time I let those walls down, they reminded me that I didn't matter, not the way Emily did. I was useful for chores and errands and making the family look good when they needed a responsible daughter for church events. But I was never actually wanted, never actually loved. The worst part was watching them shower Emily with affection I'd never received. I'd see my father ruffle her hair and call her princess. I'd watch my stepmother hug her for no reason, just because. They'd have inside jokes and laugh together at dinner while I sat there like a piece of furniture. When Emily struggled with homework, they'd spend hours helping her. When I needed help, I was told to figure it out yourself, you're smart enough. But the moment that shattered everything, the moment I finally understood I had to leave or be destroyed, came 3 weeks after my 18th birthday. I'd been awarded a full academic scholarship to State University, full tuition, room and board, everything. It was my ticket out, my future. I was so careful with the paperwork, so meticulous about the deadlines. I'd been accepted early decision, and all I had to do was confirm my attendance by April 1st. On April 3rd, I got a call from the university admissions office. The woman's voice was confused and disappointed. "Ms. Robbins, we received your withdrawal call last week, but we wanted to follow up since you seemed like such a strong candidate. Is there any way we can change your mind? We really hate to lose you." My blood went cold. "What withdrawal call?" "Your father called on March 28th and said you decided not to attend. He said you were needed at home for family reasons." I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was hearing. When I finally found my voice, I asked if I could still accept. She said they'd already given my scholarship to someone on the wait list. It was too late. I confronted my father that night. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Emily's going through a difficult time," he said, as if that explained destroying my future. "She needs stability. She needs you here to help her adjust to high school. You can go to community college locally. It's cheaper anyway." Emily's difficult time was that a boy she liked didn't ask her to homecoming. That was the family emergency that justified sabotaging my scholarship. That was when I learned that no matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I worked, I would always be sacrificed for Emily's comfort. I left 2 weeks later with everything I owned in 2 suitcases. Didn't ask permission. Didn't ask for money. Just walked out and never looked back. I worked 3 jobs to pay for community college, then transferred to a state school on loans I'd spend 10 years paying off. Every step forward was harder than it needed to be, because my father had stolen my chance at an easier path. Now, standing in Aunt Martha's guest room, I finally understood why. They'd stolen my mother's money, used it on themselves and on Emily, and they needed me, beaten down, needed me struggling, needed me to never question why I had nothing when my mother had left me everything. They'd trained me from childhood to accept scraps, to never expect more, to stay small and invisible and obedient. They thought I'd always be that child, forever subservient, forever accepting whatever crumbs they chose to throw my way. They thought wrong. I had exactly $473 in my checking account the day I left home at 18. That money saved from birthday gifts and odd jobs over the years was supposed to last until I found work. It lasted 9 days. On day 10, I was eating packets of crackers I'd taken from a diner where I'd applied for a waitressing job and sleeping on a friend's couch that smelled like cigarettes and regret. Most people would have called that rock bottom. I called it freedom. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 jobs. Morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoon data entry at a medical billing company, and weekend nights waitressing at a chain restaurant where the tips were decent if you could smile through the harassment. I slept 4 hours a night and enrolled in community college classes, taking the maximum load allowed. My friend's couch became a studio apartment I shared with 2 other girls we rotated, who got the actual bedroom sleeping in 8-hour shifts that barely overlapped. But here's what my family never understood: all those years of being treated like I was worthless had taught me something valuable. I had nothing to lose. No safety net meant I couldn't afford to fail, so I simply didn't. Every rejection became data to analyze. Every setback became a lesson in what not to do next time. The resilience they thought they'd beaten out of me had actually been forged in their cruelty, tempered into something unbreakable. At the medical billing company where I did data entry, I noticed patterns. Insurance claims that got paid versus ones that got rejected. It wasn't random. There were specific coding combinations that triggered automatic approvals. I spent my lunch breaks creating a spreadsheet analyzing thousands of claims, identifying the patterns. When I showed my supervisor, she brought me to her boss. Within 6 months, I was promoted to analytics specialist. Within a year, I was making enough to quit my other jobs and focus on school. That's when I discovered I had a gift for seeing patterns other people missed. Market trends, consumer behavior, financial indicators that telegraphed future movements. I could read them like other people read novels. I started with $500 invested in a stock I'd analyzed obsessively. It doubled in 3 months. I reinvested every penny, doubled it again, kept reinvesting, kept analyzing, kept learning. While working full-time and carrying a full course load, I was building something my family would never see coming. I transferred to State University on a combination of loans, grants, and my own saved money. Graduated summa cum laude with a degree in economics and a minor in data science. The student loan debt was crushing $60,000, but I had a job lined up before graduation at a mid-sized investment firm. Started as a junior analyst. Made senior analyst in 18 months by consistently predicting market movements with uncanny accuracy. My supervisor called it intuition. It wasn't. It was hundreds of hours of pattern recognition of analyzing data, while everyone else was sleeping, of seeing connections that existed just beneath the surface of obvious information. At 25, I made my first major real estate investment. The housing market was showing early signs of stress, prices inflating beyond sustainable levels. Everyone else saw opportunity. I saw a bubble about to burst. I waited. When the market crashed in 2008 and everyone was panicking, I bought 3 foreclosed properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods for pennies on the dollar, held them, renovated them slowly, carefully, sold 2 5 years later for 3 times what I paid, kept 1 as a rental that still generates income today. That's when I understood the real game. Wealth wasn't about working harder. I'd been working hard my entire life. Wealth was about working smarter, about seeing opportunities before they became obvious, about patience and timing and having the courage to move when everyone else was frozen with fear. I started acquiring tech stocks in 2010. Companies nobody had heard of yet, startups with algorithms I understood and potential I could see. Amazon when people still thought it was just an online bookstore. Apple before the iPhone revolution really took off. Tesla, when everyone called Elon Musk crazy. I didn't invest based on hype or tips. I invested based on analysis, on understanding technology trends and consumer psychology patterns that told me where the world was heading. By 30, my net worth crossed $2 million. I was a millionaire, and my family had no idea I was anything more than a struggling analyst barely making ends meet. I kept it that way deliberately. I didn't move to a fancy apartment or buy a luxury car. I wore simple clothes from outlet stores, drove a reliable Honda, lived in a comfortable but modest 1-bedroom in a good neighborhood. I set up LLCs and investment vehicles that kept my name off public records. In the finance world, I built a reputation as a brilliant consultant who worked with major corporations on strategic planning, but I did it quietly without fanfare or social media presence. The only person who knew the truth was Aunt Martha. I'd started sending her money once I could afford it, small amounts at first, then larger as my success grew. She never asked for it, but I knew she was the only one in my family who'd actually cared about me, and I wanted her final years to be comfortable. She'd call me sometimes amazed at what I'd built from nothing. "Your mother would be so proud," she'd say, and I'd have to swallow the lump in my throat because I'd never known my mother never had the chance to make her proud. My wealth wasn't just money. It was freedom from ever having to depend on anyone who'd hurt me. It was knowledge that I'd built something real and lasting through my own intelligence and effort. It was power. The kind of power that comes from being underestimated while holding all the cards. It was connections in high places, relationships with lawyers and financial advisors and people who owed me favors. It was the ability to move through the world on my own terms, answerable to no one. I could have flaunted it. Could have shown up at family gatherings in designer clothes, driving a sports car, throwing my success in their faces. But I understood something they never would. The most dangerous opponent is the one you don't see coming. Let them think I was barely surviving. Let them believe their poor, struggling daughter was just getting by. Let them assume I was weak and defeated, and still that scared little girl who'd left with 2 suitcases. Their underestimation was my greatest weapon. And standing in Aunt Martha's guest room holding proof of their decades of theft, I felt that cold certainty settle deeper into my bones. They'd stolen $2.3 million from me. They'd stolen my childhood, my sense of self-worth, my trust fund, and now they wanted to steal the house I'd saved. They'd pushed and pushed, assuming I'd always bend, always break, always accept whatever they decided to do to me. And now they're about to learn exactly who they underestimated. The mortgage crisis began 8 months before that Christmas dinner. Aunt Martha had called me in April, her voice tight with worry. "Crystal, sweetheart, I need to tell you something, but you can't let them know it came from me. She explained that my father and Linda had gotten themselves into serious financial trouble. Credit card debt, bad investments, medical bills they'd ignored. The bank had sent a final foreclosure notice. They had 60 days to pay $720,000 or lose the house. My first instinct was to let them lose it. Let them face the consequences of their financial irresponsibility just like they'd let me struggle through college with no help. Let them learn what it felt like to lose everything. But then Martha said something that changed my mind. I don't know where I'll go, Crystal. This is my home, too. I've lived here for 15 years, ever since your uncle passed. I'm too old to start over. That's what broke me. Not concern for my father or Linda, not even worry about Emily, who was perfectly capable of getting her own apartment. But the image of Aunt Martha, 72 years old, with arthritis and a fixed income, having to pack up her life and find somewhere else to live because of their failures. She was the only person in that house who'd ever loved me. The only one who'd called to check on me over the years, who remembered my birthday, who asked about my life because she actually cared about the answer. So I called my lawyer, Daniel Chen, a man who'd become not just my attorney, but a trusted advisor over the years. I need to structure a mortgage payoff, I told him. But I want protection. Legal protection. We worked on it for 2 weeks, crafting documents that would save my family's house, while ensuring they couldn't simply take my money and give me nothing in return. The refinancing package was comprehensive, 73 pages of legal paperwork. Buried in Section 47, subsection C, in language that required careful reading to understand, was the clause that made me a legal co-owner of the property. Any sale, transfer, or encumbrance of the house would require my written consent. My name went on the title alongside my father's and Linda's. Daniel advised them to have their own lawyer review everything before signing. They were so desperate, so panicked about the foreclosure deadline that they waved him off. It's fine, my father had said on the phone when Daniel called to explain the process. We just need this handled quickly. They signed everything without reading it carefully. Linda later told Aunt Martha she'd been too stressed to focus on legal jargon. That willful ignorance would cost them everything. The $720,000 came from my investment accounts liquidating positions I'd held for years. It hurt to watch that money transfer out, knowing I was saving people who'd never saved me. But I did it. Completed the transaction through Daniel's office, so my name stayed off their immediate radar. The mortgage was paid in full. The house was safe. I expected nothing from them, not gratitude, not acknowledgement, not even a thank you card. I knew better than to expect emotional maturity from people who had none. But what came next was worse than silence. It was entitlement. Aunt Martha told me my father's exact words when the bank confirmed the mortgage was cleared. Well, Crystal finally did something useful for this family. Not, thank you. Not, we're grateful. Just an acknowledgement that I'd fulfilled what he apparently viewed as my obligation. Linda was worse. She actually complained to Martha that Crystal made us sign all that complicated paperwork when we were already stressed. She could have just written a check like a normal person. They never called me directly, never acknowledged the sacrifice. I heard through Martha that they'd told extended family some vague story about refinancing without mentioning I'd paid the entire amount. They let relatives believe they'd handled their financial crisis themselves. The few times money came up, Linda would say things like, "We took care of it," with a tight smile, as if $720,000 had simply materialized from their responsible financial planning. Then, about 6 months after the payoff, I overheard something that made my blood boil. I'd stopped by to drop off a birthday gift for Martha, and my father was in his study on the phone with someone, door half open. His voice carried down the hallway. "Crystal should be happy to help after we raised her all those years. We put a roof over her head, fed her, clothed her. This is just her paying back what she owes us. Besides, Emily deserves to benefit from family assets. She's actually appreciative of what we've done for her." I stood frozen in that hallway, listening to him reframe my generosity as debt repayment. Listening to him erase my entire painful childhood and replace it with some fantasy where he'd been a loving father who deserved compensation. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. He'd actually convinced himself that the bare minimum of providing food and shelter to a child he'd created was somehow a favor I needed to repay with hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's when I started preparing for what might come next. I had Daniel pull all the property records, verify that my name was securely on the title, and prepare documentation proving the source of funds for the mortgage payment. I didn't know exactly what they'd try, but I knew enough about their character to understand they'd find a way to betray me again. It was only a matter of time. I just didn't expect them to be quite this brazen. Announcing at Christmas dinner in front of family and friends that they were giving away a house I legally co-owned as a gift to my sister. Not even asking my permission. Not even acknowledging my investment. Just casually erasing my contribution like it had never happened and handing my property to Emily like she was entitled to it. This wasn't favoritism anymore. This wasn't just emotional abuse or childhood dysfunction. This was theft. This was fraud. This was a deliberate, calculated attempt to steal from me while I sat at their dinner table expected to smile and accept it like the obedient daughter they'd always demanded I be. They'd finally crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And standing there in Martha's guest room holding evidence of even deeper betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. Something cold and certain and absolutely done with being the victim in their story. If they want war, I thought I'll give them a war they never saw coming. I stayed at Aunt Martha's house that night. I couldn't bear to sleep under the same roof as my parents couldn't pretend everything was normal after what I'd learned. Martha made up the guest bed and brought me chamomile tea I didn't drink. I lay awake until dawn, my mind working through strategies, scenarios, legal options. By the time morning light filtered through the curtains, I'd made several decisions about what came next. Martha insisted I come back to the house for breakfast before I left town. "You need to eat something, and I don't want them thinking they've chased you away," she said firmly. So I returned to that dining room table one more time, showered and dressed my face a mask of composure that revealed nothing of the plans forming in my mind. The breakfast table was smaller than last night's dinner crowd, just immediate family and a few relatives who'd stayed overnight. Emily sat across from me in her pink silk pajamas, scrolling through her phone with that entitled ease of someone who'd never faced a real consequence. My father read the newspaper. Linda fussed over scrambled eggs and bacon. The normalcy of it all felt surreal given what had happened just hours before. Emily looked up from her phone and said, apropos of nothing, "Oh, Crystal, I've been meaning to talk to you about my graduation party." Her tone was light casual, as if she were discussing the weather. "It's going to be at the Riverside Estate in early May, really elegant affair. About 100 guests. I've been working with a party planner for months." I took a sip of coffee and waited. I could feel what was coming. "The thing is," Emily continued, still not quite meeting my eyes, "I want to keep the energy really positive that day. It's such an important milestone for me, and I just think having family drama or tension would really bring down the vibe." She finally glanced up and I saw something flicker in her expression. Uncertainty, maybe. Or guilt masquerading as confidence. "So I've decided it's probably better if you don't come. No offense, but you've always been kind of intense, and I just want everyone to be happy and celebrating me." The table went silent. A cousin stared into her orange juice like it held the secrets of the universe. An uncle suddenly became fascinated with buttering his toast. Only Martha looked up sharply, her face reddening with anger, but I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. "Not now." "I see," I said calmly. "You don't want me at your graduation party?" "It's nothing personal," Emily said quickly, her words tumbling out. "It's just that you've been away from the family for so long and people might ask awkward questions, and I don't want to deal with that on my special day. Mom and Dad agree it's for the best." I turned to my father, who'd lowered his newspaper just enough to watch the exchange. "Is that true?" He had the audacity to look sympathetic, like he was doing me a favor. "Crystal, you have to understand this is Emily's celebration. She's worked very hard for this degree, and she deserves to have her day exactly as she wants it. Your presence might make her uncomfortable, and that's not fair to her." My presence, I repeated slowly. After I saved this house from foreclosure. After I paid $720,000 so you wouldn't be homeless. My presence at a family celebration would be uncomfortable. Linda jumped in her voice, taking on that patronizing tone I remembered from childhood. Crystal, you made your choice to distance yourself from this family years ago. You can't expect to just show up now and be part of everything. Emily needs support from people who've actually been present in her life. The gaslighting was masterful, really. They'd rewritten 2 decades of history in a single sentence, transforming my escape from abuse into voluntary abandonment, making my survival into a character flaw. I almost admired how completely they'd convinced themselves of their own narrative. Besides, my father added, folding his newspaper with deliberate precision, "You've always been difficult, Crystal, even as a child. Emily just wants a drama-free celebration, and frankly, that's reasonable given your history of creating tension." My history of creating tension. I'd been silent and obedient my entire childhood, worked myself to exhaustion to avoid their criticism, and this was how they remembered it. I was the problem. I was the source of family discord, not their theft, not their favoritism, not their decades of emotional abuse. Me. I set down my coffee cup gently and looked at Emily, who was now very interested in her phone again. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "You don't want me at your graduation party. That's completely your choice to make." Emily looked up surprised. I think she'd been braced for tears or arguments. "Oh, well, good. I'm glad you're being mature about this." "Maturity is something I learned a long time ago," I said. I stood up, collected my coat from the back of my chair. "Thank you for breakfast, Martha." I leaned down and kissed her cheek, whispered so only she could hear, "Trust me." As I walked toward the door, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hi, Crystal. It's Rachel Morrison from State. I heard through mutual friends about family stuff happening. I want to help if I can." Rachel Morrison. I hadn't thought about her in nearly 10 years. We'd been in the same economics program, though we'd never been particularly close. The timing of her message was oddly convenient, but I filed that observation away for later. I paused at the doorway and turned back. Emily was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Satisfaction mixed with something else. Nervousness, maybe. She'd expected me to fight this, to beg to make a scene. My calm acceptance was clearly unsettling her more than anger would have. "Emily," I said softly, and everyone's attention snapped to me. "Your graduation is in early May, you said." "May 7th, she confirmed warily. "That gives me about 4.5 months. I smiled, and I saw Emily's face go slightly pale. "I hope you enjoy every moment of planning your perfect party." My father frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what I said. Enjoy it." I pulled on my coat, taking my time with each button. "You know what they say about people who sleep peacefully, don't you?" "What?" Emily asked, her voice suddenly small. I met her eyes directly for the first time that morning. "You'll soon learn why you shouldn't wake someone who's been sleeping peacefully." I walked out into the cold December morning, leaving them sitting at that breakfast table in confused silence. My phone buzzed again, Rachel being persistent. I'd deal with that later. Right now, I had 4.5 months to prepare for the most satisfying moment of my life. 4.5 months to gather evidence, build my case, and ensure that Emily's perfect graduation party became something she'd never forget. The war had officially begun. They just didn't know it yet. I drove back to my apartment in the city, my mind already 3 steps ahead. The holidays passed in a blur of strategic planning. I spent Christmas Day alone with takeout Chinese food and a legal pad mapping out every move, like a chess grandmaster plotting an endgame. New Year's came and went with barely a notice. By the first week of January, I was ready to begin. My first call was to Daniel Chen. I'd met him 6 years ago through Aunt Martha, who'd heard from a friend that he was the best real estate attorney in the state. What started as a professional relationship had evolved into something closer to mentorship. I'd helped Daniel's investment clients over the years, providing market analysis that saved them millions in bad deals. He'd told me more than once that I had a gift for seeing financial disasters before they happened. Now it was time to call in those favors. "Crystal," he answered on the second ring, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "Happy New Year. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I need your help with something complicated." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Family matter, property law, possibly fraud. There was a pause, then his tone shifted to pure professional focus. "Come to my office. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Bring every document you have." Daniel's office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He met me in his conference room, already having coffee and bagels waiting. At 53, he was sharp-featured and intense, with silver streaking his black hair and eyes that missed nothing. He listened without interruption as I laid out the entire situation, from my stolen childhood to the trust fund theft to the mortgage payoff and the Christmas dinner betrayal. When I finished, he sat back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. "First question. What do you want, justice, revenge, or your money back?" "All three," I said without hesitation. He smiled, a predatory expression that reminded me why he had a reputation for destroying opponents in court. "Good. I like clear objectives." He pulled out the mortgage refinancing documents I'd brought, the 73-page package my parents had signed last April. He flipped through them with practiced efficiency, stopping at page 47. "Here, Section C, subsection 3. Do you remember what this says? That's where you added me as co-owner on the title. Not just co-owner. Joint tenant with rights of survivorship. That means this property cannot be sold, transferred, gifted, or encumbered without your explicit written consent. Your signature is required on any legal document affecting this property." He looked up at me. "Crystal, your parents can't give this house to Emily. It's legally impossible. If they try, the title company will reject it the moment they run a basic title search." The satisfaction that flooded through me was almost physical. "They have no idea, do they?" "Based on what you've told me about their financial sophistication, no. They probably saw refinancing documents and signed without reading past the first 3 pages. Daniel pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Now about this trust fund. $2.3 million, you said. Do you have documentation?" I handed him the copies Aunt Martha had given me. He spent 20 minutes reviewing them in silence, occasionally making notes or taking photos with his phone. Finally, he looked up and his expression was grim. "This is worse than standard embezzlement. This is systematic theft from a minor with forged documents and fraudulent claims. The statute of limitations is tricky, but given that you were a minor and they deliberately concealed the theft, we can argue the discovery rule applies. You have a case." "How strong?" "Criminal prosecution level strong. Civil recovery is certain. Criminal charges are probable if we find a prosecutor willing to take it on." He met my eyes. "But pursuing this will destroy your family's lives completely. Your father could go to prison. They'll lose everything. There's no walking this back once we start." "Good," I said flatly. We spent the next 2 hours planning strategy, freezing the property, pursuing trust fund recovery, building the case for fraud. Daniel would start with formal legal notices, escalating if they failed to cooperate. The goal was to make them understand they'd picked a fight with the wrong daughter. As our meeting was wrapping up, my phone buzzed. Another text from Rachel Morrison. "Hey, just checking in. Did you think about what I said? I really want to help?" Daniel noticed my expression. "Problem?" "Maybe." I pulled up Rachel's social media profiles and showed him. "This woman, Rachel Morrison, we went to college together. Haven't spoken in nearly 10 years. She reached out the day after my family betrayed me, claiming she wants to help. But look at this." I scrolled through Rachel's Facebook. Photos of her and Emily at brunches, commenting on each other's posts, constantly inside jokes in the comments. They'd been friends for at least 2 years based on the timestamp history. "Interesting timing," Daniel observed. "Rachel and I weren't friends in college. She was jealous competitive. There was an incident junior year where I got an internship at Morgan Stanley that she'd wanted. She spread rumors that I'd slept with the hiring manager to get it. The memory still stung. She made my life miserable for an entire semester. And now she's best friends with your sister and suddenly wants to help you. Daniel's skepticism was evident. That's not suspicious at all. I smiled slowly. Actually, it's perfect. If Emily sent her to spy on me to figure out what I'm planning, then I can use that. Feed her false information, Daniel said, catching on immediately. See what your family does with it. Exactly. I started typing a response to Rachel, crafting it carefully. I'll tell her I'm planning to sue the bank first for improper mortgage handling. Make it sound plausible but completely wrong. If she reports back to Emily, they'll waste time and energy preparing for the wrong battle. While we hit them from a direction they're not watching, Daniel finished. He was grinning now. You know, I've represented some brilliant strategists over the years, but Crystal, you're something else. I sent the message to Rachel accepting her offer to help and suggesting we meet for coffee next week to discuss my legal strategy against the bank. Within minutes, she responded enthusiastically. Too enthusiastically. The trap was set. Daniel walked me to the elevator, his expression thoughtful. Crystal, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. He paused, choosing his words precisely. What we're planning here, it's legally sound, morally justified, and strategically brilliant. But it's also going to be brutal. Lives will be ruined. Relationships will be permanently destroyed. So I need to know, do you want peace or do you want war? I thought about my childhood, the cold dinners and colder love, the stolen trust fund and stolen opportunities, the mortgage I'd paid only to have them try to give my house away, Emily's smug face as she uninvited me from her party, my father's casual cruelty over Christmas turkey, the decades of being invisible, unwanted, used. I looked Daniel straight in the eye and said, war. Daniel and I scheduled a follow-up meeting for late January to review everything Aunt Martha had given me. I'd been so focused on the immediate mortgage documents and property rights that I hadn't fully absorbed the magnitude of the trust fund theft. But Daniel insisted we needed to examine every piece of evidence Martha had collected, build a comprehensive case that left no gaps for my family to exploit. Martha drove into the city on a gray January afternoon, the sky threatening snow. She arrived at Daniel's office carrying that same worn leather satchel, but this time she pulled out 3 additional manila envelopes I hadn't seen before. I didn't want to overwhelm you at Christmas, she explained, her hands trembling slightly as she laid them on the conference table, but you need to see everything now, all of it. The first envelope contained the original trust fund establishment documents from 35 years ago. I recognized my mother's name on the signature line Sarah Elizabeth Chambers, and felt an ache in my chest for a woman I'd never known. The document was dated 6 months before her death, as if she'd somehow known her time was limited. The trust named Crystal Marie Robbins as sole beneficiary to receive full distribution upon reaching age 21. The initial funding amount was listed as $2,300,000 a fortune in 1989. An even larger fortune by the time I should have received it with accumulated interest. Your mother was from old money, Martha explained softly, watching my face as I read. Her family had shipping investments going back 3 generations. When she married your father, her parents were against it. They thought Richard was a social climber marrying above his station. They were right, of course, but Sarah loved him anyway. Or thought she did. Martha's voice carried decades of regret. When Sarah got sick, cancer very aggressive, she knew what would happen. She knew Richard would remarry quickly, and she wanted to make absolutely certain you'd be taken care of. The trust was her way of protecting you from beyond the grave. The second envelope contained bank statements spanning 2 decades. I watched page after page as the trust fund balance grew with compound interest and strategic investments reaching nearly $3.8 million by the time I turned 21. Then the withdrawals began. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. Each withdrawal had authorization paperwork attached, and each signature purporting to be mine was an obvious forgery. I could see it even without expert analysis. The handwriting was wrong, the pressure inconsistent, the letter formations all off. They weren't even careful about it, Daniel observed, examining the signatures through a magnifying glass. These forgeries wouldn't pass basic scrutiny if anyone had been watching, but no one was watching because they'd convinced the trust administrator that you'd waived all contact and wanted the distributions handled quietly. The third envelope was the most damning. It contained correspondence between my father and the trust administrator, letters I'd supposedly written, requesting no contact, claiming I'd moved overseas and wanted my rights transferred to my family for management. Letter after letter in handwriting that bore no resemblance to mine, on stationery I'd never touched, discussing plans I'd never made. One letter, dated just after my 21st birthday, explicitly stated I was waiving all claims to the trust principal and requesting it be redistributed to family members as appropriate. This is fraud on multiple levels, Daniel said, his voice tight with professional fury. Forgery, identity theft from a minor trust misappropriation. The paper trail is so complete, it's almost arrogant. They genuinely believed you'd never find out. Martha pulled out another document, this one a property deed. The house, she said, pointing to the purchase date. They bought it 15 years ago using $300,000 from the trust as the down payment. The mortgage they took out covered the rest. Your mother's money bought that house, Crystal. Her trust fund, meant to give you security, was used to buy the home they're now trying to give to Emily. I stared at the deed, at the numbers that represented my mother's love and foresight being twisted into a tool for my abuse. She wanted me to always have a home, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And they used her money to buy a house they'd spend my childhood making me feel I didn't belong in. There's more, Martha said, though she looked like she didn't want to continue. The trust specifically mentioned the house. There was a clause stating that any real property purchased with trust funds should ultimately transfer to you. Your mother was very specific about her wishes. She wanted you to have a physical home, not just money. Security, roots, everything Richard's treatment denied you. Daniel was already making notes, his pen flying across his legal pad. Okay, let's talk statute of limitations, because that's going to be their first defense. He looked up at me. Most financial fraud has a 3 to 6 year statute of limitations in this state. But we have multiple exceptions that apply here. First, you were a minor when the theft began. Courts universally hold that the statute doesn't start running until the minor reaches majority age 18. That gives us a baseline. But I'm 38 now, I pointed out. 20 years past 18. Which brings us to the second exception, fraudulent concealment. Daniel flipped to a page in his legal reference book marked with several sticky notes. When the defendant actively conceals the fraud and creating fake letters, forging signatures, and lying to trust administrators absolutely qualifies, the statute of limitations is told until the plaintiff discovers or reasonably should have discovered the fraud. Courts call this the discovery rule. You only found out about this trust fund at Christmas. The clock literally just started. What about the trust administrator? I asked. Don't they have liability for allowing this? Potentially, but that's secondary. Our primary targets are the people who actually stole from you. Daniel tapped the forged signatures. Third exception, in cases involving theft of inheritance from minors, several jurisdictions have recognized extended limitation periods, especially when the theft was committed by guardians or parents in positions of trust. The betrayal of fiduciary duty adds another layer. We have case law supporting actions filed decades after the initial theft. Martha pulled out one final document, a list handwritten in her careful script. I tracked every major expense I could remember them making over the years. The European vacation when Emily graduated high school, $60,000. Emily's new car for her 16th birthday, $45,000. The kitchen renovation, $90,000. Private school tuition for Emily, $120,000 over 4 years. I wrote down everything I could remember with approximate dates. It's not complete, but it shows a pattern. I looked at the list at the itemized accounting of my stolen future spent on my sister's privilege. Every luxury Emily had enjoyed, every opportunity she'd been given, had been purchased with money my mother had intended for me. The house I'd saved from foreclosure with my own earnings had been bought partially with my inheritance. The graduation party Emily didn't want me attending would likely be funded with the remnants of my trust. "Can we recover it?" I asked Daniel. "All of it." "The trust principal plus compound interest, absolutely. Punitive damages, highly likely. Attorney's fees, certainly. We're probably looking at between $4 and $5 million in total recovery." He met my eyes. "And that's just the civil case. The criminal exposure here is substantial. Forgery, identity theft under federal law, wire fraud. If any of the trust transfers crossed state lines, theft exceeding statutory limits for felony prosecution. Your father and stepmother could face serious prison time." "Good," I said, and I meant it. I felt Martha's hand on my arm, her touch gentle, but her voice firm. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart? Once you start, there's no going back. They're still your family." I looked at her, this woman who'd been more family to me than anyone who shared my blood. "They stole from me first," I said clearly. "They stole my mother's love translated into money meant to protect me. They stole my childhood, my sense of worth, my opportunities. They stole a house I saved and tried to give it away. Now I'm taking back everything." By early February, I'd assembled my team. Daniel Chen was handling the legal strategy, but I needed someone to dig deeper into the financial cesspool that was my family's life. I needed documentation, evidence, patterns of behavior that would stand up in court and in public opinion. I needed ammunition. Marcus Webb came highly recommended by Daniel, a former FBI financial crimes investigator who'd gone private after 20 years with the Bureau. He specialized in white-collar crime forensic accounting and what he called comprehensive financial archaeology. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and I handed him a list of names, social security numbers, known addresses, and every piece of information I had on my father, Linda, and Emily. "How deep do you want me to go?" Marcus asked, scanning my list with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of financial crime imaginable. "All the way to bedrock," I said. "I want to know every account, every debt, every transaction that looks even slightly questionable. Tax returns, credit reports, loan applications, everything. If they've jaywalked, I want to know about it." He smiled slightly. "That thorough costs money." "I have money," I said, and slid him a check for his retainer that made his eyebrows rise. "I want this done in 2 weeks." Marcus delivered in 12 days. He called me on a Thursday evening and asked me to come to his office. When I arrived, he had 3 thick binders laid out on his conference table, each one labeled with a family member's name. The binder with Emily's name was surprisingly thick. "I've investigated organized crime figures with cleaner financial histories than your family," Marcus said without preamble. He opened my father's binder first. "Richard Robbins. On paper, he's a senior operations manager making $120,000 a year. Respectable salary. But he's drowning. Credit card debt across 7 cards totaling $183,000. Most of it high-interest minimum payments barely covering the monthly charges. He's been juggling this debt for at least 8 years based on the age of the accounts." He flipped to a section marked with red tabs. "Here's where it gets criminal. Tax returns for the past 5 years. He's been declaring income, but look at these business expense deductions." Marcus pointed to line after line of questionable claims. "Home office deductions for a house he doesn't run a business from. Vehicle expenses for cars that aren't used for work. Entertainment expenses that are clearly personal. I'd estimate he's underreported income by at least $40,000 per year, maybe more. That's tax fraud multiple years well past the threshold for criminal prosecution." "And the home equity line of credit?" I asked, remembering Aunt Martha's concerns about how they'd gotten so deep in debt. "That's interesting." Marcus pulled out loan documents. "He took out a HELOC for $200,000 3 years ago. The signature on the spousal consent form is supposedly Linda's, but look at this." He laid out several documents side by side: the HELOC consent, a prior refinancing document Linda had definitely signed, and a credit card application. The signatures don't match. I'm not a handwriting expert, but I'd bet money this spousal consent was forged. If Linda didn't know about this loan, that's fraud. If she did know and he forged it anyway for some other reason, that's also fraud. He moved to Linda's binder, which was thinner but no less damning. Linda Robbins. Roughly the same pattern of debt and questionable tax claims. But the interesting thing about Linda is her online shopping addiction. I pulled credit card statements. She spends an average of $4,000 a month on clothing, home decor, and luxury items. Most of it ends up being returned, but the cycle is continuous. Classic compulsive spending pattern. Then Marcus opened Emily's binder and his expression darkened. "This is where things get federally illegal," he said. "Emily Robbins used your Social Security number to take out 4 separate student loans between 2018 and 2021. Total amount borrowed $62,000. Amount repaid 0. The loans are all in default, and they've been destroying your credit score for years." I felt my hands clench. I'd noticed my credit score dropping in my late 20s had disputed some items that didn't look familiar, but I'd been told they were valid debts, and I'd eventually given up fighting it. I'd worked around the bad credit paid cash for everything rebuilt slowly. And all along, it was Emily. My own sister had stolen my identity and destroyed my financial reputation while I was struggling to build a life. "It gets worse," Marcus continued. 2 of these loans were taken out using forged enrollment documents. Emily wasn't even attending the schools she claimed to be enrolled in when she applied. That's multiple layers of fraud. Identity theft under federal law carries up to 15 years. Student loan fraud can add another 20. We're talking serious prison time if prosecuted. "Can you prove it was her and not someone else who stole my identity?" Marcus pulled out a sheet of paper. "The loan applications were submitted from IP addresses that trace back to your parents' home. The callback numbers were Emily's cell phone. And here's the kicker: one application included a scan of a driver's license. They didn't even bother photoshopping it well. You can see where they pasted Emily's photo over yours." I stared at the document, at the crude digital manipulation that had been enough to fool a loan processor who probably reviewed hundreds of applications a day. My face with Emily's features badly superimposed. It would have been laughable if it wasn't evidence of felony fraud. "There's more in here," Marcus said, tapping the binders. "Patterns of small-scale insurance fraud, inflated damage claims, a workers' compensation claim from your father that looks extremely questionable. These people have been operating on the edge of legality for years, probably because they've never faced consequences. They got away with it so long, they got sloppy." I spent 2 hours going through every page of Marcus's report. Each revelation was another piece of ammunition, another pressure point I could use. The corporate maneuvering I'd started months ago was proceeding exactly as planned. I'd begun buying shares in Tech Manu Corporation last July, 6 months before the Christmas dinner, when I'd had a feeling my family was planning something. I'd used 3 separate LLCs to structure the purchases, keeping each below reporting thresholds that would trigger ownership disclosures. As of today, I owned 14.7% of the company where my father had worked for 25 years with options to purchase another 20% from a retiring board member who'd already agreed to sell. My father had no idea that several of his anonymous shareholders were actually his daughter. No idea that the quarterly reports he helped prepare went straight to me. No idea that I'd been positioning myself for this moment for half a year. I looked at the 3 binders at the comprehensive documentation of my family's crimes and moral failures: tax fraud, identity theft, student loan fraud, forgery, trust fund embezzlement. Every piece carefully documented, cross-referenced, ready for legal action or public exposure or whatever tool I needed to use when the time came. I met Marcus's eyes and said quietly, "Perfect." By mid-March, Emily's graduation was less than 2 months away. I'd spent the past 6 weeks gathering intelligence, building my legal case, and carefully positioning every piece on the board. Now it was time to make the first move subtle, deniable, but devastating in its psychological impact. I crafted the email with surgical precision. It needed to look like an accidental forward something sent to me that I'd carelessly included them on by mistake. The kind of error busy people make when they're juggling multiple email threads. Daniel helped me draft the contents to sound authentic, formal legal language that was vague enough to be terrifying, but specific enough to be believable. The email appeared to be from a bank compliance officer to Daniel's firm, per your request for verification of mortgage transaction 4782-CH and related trust fund documentation. Our preliminary review has detected several irregularities requiring further investigation. We've flagged accounts ending in 7734 and 8821 for comprehensive audit. Please advise on timeline for formal inquiry proceedings. I added a fake reply from Daniel. Acknowledged, client has authorized full investigation. Proceeding with document subpoenas next week. Then I hit forward, typed my parents' and Emily's email addresses in the to field, as if I'd meant to send it to Aunt Martha, and added a brief note. Martha, can you believe this? Everything is finally coming together. Talk soon. I sent it at 9 p.m. on a Friday night, timing it perfectly. They'd see it over the weekend when banks were closed, when they couldn't immediately call anyone to fix whatever they thought was broken. Then I activated the second part of the plan. Daniel had prepared paperwork invoking my rights as property co-owner to request a temporary hold on all mortgage account access pending legal review. It was completely legitimate. Co-owners have the right to protect their interests during potential disputes. The hold would last 72 hours, just long enough to make them panic. I turned off my phone, packed a bag, and drove 3 hours north to a spa resort in wine country that I'd booked weeks ago. I checked in under my maiden name, asked for no calls to be put through, and settled into my suite with a good book and a better bottle of wine. For the next 3 days, I was completely unreachable. The silence, I knew, would terrify them more than any threat I could make. The chaos unfolded exactly as I'd predicted. Aunt Martha called Daniel's office on Saturday morning. I'd warned her what was coming and asked her to play along. She reported that my father had called her at 7 a.m. in a state of complete panic, demanding to know what Crystal was doing. Linda had tried calling the bank's customer service line 17 times, growing increasingly hysterical with each transfer to another department. Emily had shown up at Martha's house crying, saying her life was ruined. But the bank couldn't tell them anything. Every representative they reached said the same thing. I'm sorry, but there's a legal hold on this account. I cannot provide information or access at this time. You'll need to contact the attorney whose firm initiated the hold. When they called Daniel's office, they got his paralegal, who very politely said Mr. Chen was unavailable and couldn't discuss ongoing legal matters with potentially adverse parties. The phrase potentially adverse parties apparently sent Linda into a complete meltdown. Martha reported hearing her shrieking in the background of one phone call that they were being treated like criminals, that this was all a misunderstanding, that someone needed to explain to the bank that they owned the house. Sunday afternoon, Martha called Daniel with an interesting update. You were right about Rachel, she said. Emily just called asking if I'd heard from her, said Rachel was helping them figure out what Crystal is planning. I played dumb, but Emily mentioned they'd been in contact with Rachel for weeks, getting updates on Crystal's mental state and plans. So it was confirmed. Rachel was exactly what I'd suspected, Emily's spy feeding information back about my supposed strategy to sue the bank first. I'd spent 2 coffee dates with Rachel in February, carefully spinning an elaborate story about how I was building a case against the bank for improper mortgage handling, how I had evidence of predatory lending practices, how I was going to expose them publicly before filing a massive lawsuit. None of it was true, but Rachel had lapped it up, taking notes on her phone and asking detailed questions she thought were subtle. Now my family was presumably preparing to defend against a bank lawsuit that would never come, while I positioned my actual attacks from completely different directions. They were looking left while I came from the right. Martha also reported that the family was turning on each other viciously. She'd overheard a screaming match between my father and Linda through the phone. You said you covered everything, Linda had shrieked. You said the signatures looked good enough. My father had shouted back something about Linda being too obvious about favoring Emily, about how if she'd just treated both girls equally on paper, none of this would be happening. The blame shifting and finger pointing had apparently gone on for hours. Emily was having daily anxiety attacks, convinced that some scandal was going to break right before graduation and destroy her perfect day. She'd called Martha crying, saying she couldn't handle the stress, and asking why I was doing this to her. The cognitive dissonance was breathtaking somehow in Emily's mind. She was the victim of my cruelty, rather than facing consequences for her own crimes. I meanwhile was getting a hot stone massage and drinking champagne in a eucalyptus steam room. That evening I decided to add a little more psychological pressure. I posted a quote on my rarely used social media account, something I'd carefully selected for maximum impact. Patience isn't about waiting. It's about maintaining composure while watching your plans unfold. Within an hour, Martha texted me that Emily had called her in tears, saying, "Did you see what Crystal posted? She's planning something. She's going to ruin everything." The level of paranoia was delicious. One cryptic quote and Emily was spiraling reading threat into every word, imagining scenarios worse than anything I actually had planned, though what I had planned was pretty bad. I sat on my private balcony Sunday night looking out over the Vineyard Hills, a glass of excellent Cabernet in my hand. The 72-hour hold would lift tomorrow, but the damage was done. They'd spent 3 days in absolute panic, unable to sleep, unable to get answers, turning on each other like trapped rats. They knew something was coming but had no idea what or when. The uncertainty was eating them alive. I raised my glass to the stars and murmured, "Let the chaos begin." I returned from my spa weekend relaxed and centered, ready for the next phase. Marcus Webb had been waiting for my go-ahead, and I gave it Monday morning with a simple text, "Send the university package." He'd assembled everything meticulously. Copies of the student loan applications with forged documents. Evidence that Emily had claimed enrollment at institutions she'd never attended. Records showing Crystal Robbins listed as the borrower, while Emily Robbins received the funds. Most damning of all, IP address logs and email correspondence proving Emily had paid another student $500 to complete 2 online courses in her name last semester. Marcus didn't send it directly. He routed it through an anonymous email service that couldn't be traced back to me, attaching everything as encrypted PDFs with a simple note: "You should investigate Emily Robbins, senior marketing major, for academic fraud and identity theft. Evidence attached." The university's Office of Student Conduct received the email on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Emily was called into the dean's office for questioning. I knew this because Aunt Martha heard about it from Linda, who'd called in hysterics saying Emily was being persecuted for no reason by the administration. The investigation would take 6 to 8 weeks minimum. Universities moved slowly, required due process, formed committees. Emily would almost certainly be allowed to walk at graduation on May 7th, even if the investigation wasn't complete. But the sponsors who'd offered her post-graduation funding didn't have to wait. Within 48 hours of the investigation becoming official, 3 separate scholarship organizations suspended their commitments pending investigation results. That was $12,000 in promised funding, suddenly evaporated money Emily had been counting on for her planned move to Chicago and her apartment deposit. The rumors spread across campus like wildfire. Small school, tight community, everyone knew everyone's business. Emily's classmates whispered in dining halls and group chats. The girl who'd always projected perfect success, who'd posted endless photos of her achievements and accomplishments, was suddenly under academic investigation. The schadenfreude was apparently delicious. Martha reported that Emily had stopped going to classes, was hiding in her apartment, had deleted all her social media accounts. Late March brought an unexpected opportunity. Martha called asking if I could stop by the house to pick up some old financial documents she'd found that might help my case. "Your father and Linda are both at work, and Emily's at school, well, supposedly at school. Coast is clear if you want to come now." I drove over mid-morning, parking in the driveway of the house I'd saved and would soon own entirely. Martha met me at the door with a folder of old tax returns she'd found in the attic. "I thought these might show more inconsistencies for Daniel," she explained, handing them over. "I need to use the bathroom," I said, heading upstairs. But I detoured past the bathroom to what had been Emily's childhood bedroom, now converted into a storage room packed with boxes, old furniture, and forgotten belongings. I'm not sure what drew me there. Curiosity, maybe, or the desire to understand my enemy better. I found the diary in a cardboard box labeled Emily Middle School, in Linda's handwriting. It was one of those journals teenage girls keep covered in stickers that had faded with time. I shouldn't have opened it. It was private invasive. But I opened it anyway, flipping through pages of typical 12-year-old concerns, crushes, friend drama complaints about homework. Then I found an entry dated October 14th, written in Emily's careful handwriting. "Today, Mom and Dad took me shopping for my birthday next month. They bought me everything I pointed at. $300 of clothes I don't even really like. But they were smiling so hard, like they were trying to prove something. To who? Sometimes I think they're trying to convince themselves they're good parents by spending money. I wish they loved me like they pretend to. They smile at me, but I can see it in their eyes. I'm just what they wanted after being disappointed by Crystal. I'm the replacement daughter, the do-over kid. Sometimes I feel like a doll they dress up and show off but don't actually know. Why do I have everything but feel so empty?" I stood there in that cluttered storage room reading and rereading those words. Emily had felt it too. The hollowness of their love, the performance of affection, masking something colder underneath. She'd been showered with privileges and material goods, but starved of genuine connection, just like I'd been starved of basic acknowledgement. Different symptoms of the same disease. I kept reading. More entries over the months revealed a pattern. Emily writing about feeling like she had to be perfect to maintain their approval. Emily describing panic attacks when her grades slipped. Emily confessing she was terrified of becoming like Crystal, invisible to them, thrown away. The irony was crushing. Emily had spent her childhood afraid of my fate while actively participating in creating it. But here was the truth I'd never considered Emily had been damaged too. Not in the same way, not with the same scars, but damaged nonetheless. Raised to believe her worth was conditional on performance, on being everything I wasn't, on maintaining an impossible standard of perfection that justified her parents' favoritism. No wonder she'd become entitled and selfish. She'd been taught that her needs superseded everyone else's, that she deserved special treatment that the world owed her, the same unconditional acceptance her parents pretended to give her. I put the diary back, disturbed by what I'd learned. It didn't change my plans. Emily had still stolen my identity, still benefited from my trust fund, still participated in my abuse. But it added complexity I hadn't wanted. Emily wasn't just a villain. She was another product of our parents' dysfunction, molded differently but equally damaged. When I came back downstairs, Martha took one look at my face and asked, "What did you find up there?" "Truth I didn't want," I said simply. Over the next week, Emily's situation deteriorated rapidly. The investigation expanded as university officials dug deeper. The scholarship suspension became permanent cancellation when sponsors discovered the identity theft allegations. Her post-graduation job offers 3 companies had been courting her, quietly withdrew after human resources departments learned about the academic investigation. Martha reported that Emily was having daily breakdowns, calling her parents, sobbing, begging them to fix it somehow. But Richard and Linda were drowning in their own panic about the mortgage and trust fund, snapping at Emily that she needed to handle her own problems and stop being so dramatic. For the first time in her life, Emily's tears weren't immediately soothed with money and attention. For the first time, her parents' love proved as conditional as their treatment of me had always been. Emily finally showed up at Martha's house on a Thursday evening, mascara-stained and desperate. Martha called me immediately. "She's here asking about you, asking if there's any way to make you stop. Should I put her on speaker?" I said. "Let me hear." Through the phone, I heard Emily's voice, raw and broken. Aunt Martha, please. Crystal is destroying my life. Everything I've worked for is falling apart. My scholarships are gone. My job offers are gone. Everyone at school thinks I'm a fraud. Can you talk to her? Can you make her understand she's ruining everything? I hung up before Martha could respond. Emily's words echoed in my head. She's destroying my life. But her life had only begun to unravel. By early April, I'd become a spectator to a demolition I'd barely needed to engineer. The pressure I'd applied, the mortgage freeze, the anonymous tip to the university, the cryptic social media post had been surgical and minimal, but it had been enough to crack a foundation that was already crumbling. Now the family was tearing itself apart from the inside, and all I had to do was watch. Aunt Martha called me almost daily with updates, her voice a mixture of sadness and vindication. You should have heard them last night, she told me on a Tuesday evening. I was in the guest room trying to read, and they were in the kitchen screaming at each other so loud I could hear every word through 2 closed doors. She recounted the fight in detail. My father had apparently started it, his voice tight with stress and accusation. This is your fault, Linda. You spoiled that girl so much she thinks she's entitled to everything. You made it so obvious how much more you loved her than Crystal. Now Crystal's using it against us. Linda had fired back immediately. My fault, you're the one who treated Crystal like garbage from the day I married you. You made her feel worthless, made her hate us, and now you're surprised she wants revenge. This is what you created, Richard. The argument had escalated from there, decades of buried resentments erupting like poison from a lanced wound. My father brought up money Linda had spent without telling him. Linda brought up a woman from his office she'd always suspected he'd had an affair with 15 years ago. He accused her of caring more about her social status than her family. She accused him of being a failure who'd never lived up to his potential and dragged her down with him. They went through everything, Martha said, her voice heavy. Every slight, every betrayal, every lie from 30 years of marriage. It was like watching people who've hated each other for decades finally admitting it. At one point, Linda screamed that marrying him was the biggest mistake of her life, and Richard said at least his first wife had actually loved him, which made Linda throw a plate. I listened to Martha's account with grim satisfaction. They'd always presented such a united front, such perfect suburban normalcy. Now the mask was off, and the ugliness underneath was pouring out. The stress of my investigation had stripped away their pretenses, revealing the rot at the core of their relationship. But the real explosion came during what was supposed to be a casual family dinner at my uncle's house that Saturday. Martha had been invited along with my parents Emily and several cousins and aunts. It was meant to be a pleasant spring gathering, a chance to catch up before Emily's graduation. Instead, it became a public detonation. Martha called me from her car immediately afterwards, still shaking. Crystal, you need to hear what just happened. Emily completely lost it and threw your parents under the bus in front of everyone. The dinner had started tense, with everyone aware of the unspoken dramas, but trying to maintain civility. Then my Aunt Caroline had innocently asked Emily about her graduation plans, and Emily had burst into tears. Between sobs, she'd started talking. About the investigation at school, about losing her scholarships, about how her whole future was destroyed. Linda had tried to shush her, hissing, "Emily, not here!" But Emily had been beyond caring about appearances. She'd turned on her parents with vicious desperation. "This is all your fault!" Emily had screamed loud enough that conversations in the next room stopped. "You made me do it. You made me sign those papers with Crystal's name. You said it was fine that she owed us that. It didn't matter. You told me to forge the documents. I was scared to say no because you'd get angry." The room had gone deadly silent. My uncle had set down his fork. My cousins had stared. "Emily, stop!" My father had said, his voice strained and low. But Emily hadn't stopped. She'd unleashed everything, the trust fund theft she'd known about for years, the mortgage refinancing scheme, the way they'd used Crystal's money to fund Emily's lifestyle. She'd presented it all as if she were a helpless victim, forced to participate, when Martha and I both knew Emily had benefited willingly from every stolen dollar. You ruined my life by treating Crystal like she was nothing, Emily had sobbed. You taught me I deserved everything, and now she's taking it all back, and I don't know how to be anything except your perfect princess. You did this to me. My father had stood up so fast his chair fell backward. How dare you blame us for your choices? We gave you everything. Everything you stole from Crystal, Emily had shrieked back. Everything that wasn't yours to give. Linda had started crying. My uncle had asked everyone to calm down, but the damage was done. Emily had publicly admitted to fraud, to participation in identity theft and trust fund embezzlement. She'd confirmed every suspicion, validated every rumor. And she'd done it in front of a dozen family members who would undoubtedly spread the story to everyone they knew. My cousin Jennifer had apparently excused herself and left immediately, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Two of my father's brothers had exchanged looks that Martha described as disgusted and embarrassed. The family gathering had dissolved within minutes, everyone making awkward excuses and leaving. They're pariahs now, Martha told me. The whole extended family knows. And Emily made it clear this isn't just family drama, it's criminal. Identity theft, fraud, stolen inheritance. Some of your cousins are talking about distancing themselves publicly so their own reputations don't get tainted by association. I sat in my apartment listening to Martha's breathless account, feeling something cold and satisfied settle in my chest. I hadn't needed to expose them publicly. They'd exposed themselves. I hadn't needed to turn them against each other. The pressure had revealed what was already there, a family held together by nothing but mutual benefit and shared secrets. The moment those benefits disappeared and the secrets threatened exposure, they'd turned on each other like rats trapped in a flooding cage. I'm not surprised they're destroying each other, Martha said, her voice carrying decades of observation. I'm only surprised it took this long. This family was built on lies and resentment, Crystal. It was always going to fall apart. You just gave it a small push. I thought about Emily's diary entry about how she'd felt like a replacement daughter. I thought about my father blaming Linda, and Linda blaming my father, and Emily blaming both of them. None of them taking responsibility. None of them showing genuine remorse for what they'd done to me. Just panic about consequences and rage at each other for not preventing this disaster. They're pulling each other down, I said softly, watching the city lights from my apartment window. And I've barely begun. After the explosive family dinner where Emily had publicly imploded, I made a strategic decision. The most powerful weapon I had wasn't another attack or revelation. It was absence, silence, the space where their paranoia could flourish unchecked. On April 15th, exactly 3 weeks before Emily's graduation, I vanished. I blocked my parents' numbers, blocked Emily's number, blocked every family member except Aunt Martha. I deleted my social media apps from my phone. I sent Daniel Chen an email saying I'd be unreachable for a week, but to proceed with all planned legal actions. Then I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove 6 hours north to a resort in the mountains I'd visited once before, a place with no cell service, spotty Wi-Fi, and a strict policy about guests being left undisturbed. I checked in under a fake name, paid cash for the week, and told the front desk I was on a digital detox and should not be contacted for any reason, short of a family emergency. Then I turned off my phone, put it in the room safe, and for 7 days I simply disappeared from my family's reach. The panic began within hours, according to Martha, who I'd given special instructions to keep me updated via the resort's landline. My father called me 16 times the first day. Linda left voicemails that started polite and escalated to frantic. Emily sent texts that Martha read to me first, asking where I was, then demanding to know, then begging me to please just talk to her. By day 2, my father had apparently started calling my workplace, my old apartment building from 3 years ago, even friends from college whose numbers he'd somehow found. Every lead was a dead end. I'd told my office I was taking personal time and would be unreachable. My former landlord had no forwarding information. My old college friends hadn't heard from me in years, and certainly weren't going to give my father information if they had. "He's acting like you've been kidnapped," Martha told me during one of our daily check-ins. He actually called the police to file a missing person report, but they told him that a 38-year-old woman who voluntarily goes off-grid isn't missing. They basically laughed at him. I spent my days hiking mountain trails, getting spa treatments, reading novels I'd been meaning to get to for years. I ate excellent food, slept 10 hours a night, and felt more peaceful than I had in months. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family spiraled into panic about what I might be planning, I was doing absolutely nothing except enjoying my vacation. But my absence was doing the work for me. Without any information about my activities or intentions, their imaginations ran wild. Martha reported that Linda had convinced herself I was meeting with prosecutors to press criminal charges. My father thought I was preparing some kind of public exposé for the media. Emily was certain I was planning to show up at her graduation and destroy it somehow. The truth was, I hadn't decided yet what I'd do at graduation. But letting them imagine worst-case scenarios was far more effective than any threat I could make. Meanwhile, their spy network was collapsing. Rachel Morrison, who'd been feeding them information about my supposed plans to sue the bank, had apparently become a liability. Martha overheard a speakerphone conversation when she stopped by to water Linda's plants, Emily screaming at Rachel about how nothing Crystal told you was true. She said she was going after the bank first. Emily had yelled, her voice shrill with panic. You said she was building a case about predatory lending. But the bank doesn't even know there's a problem. She played you, she fed you lies, and you fell for it. Rachel's response was apparently defensive and confused. I don't understand. She seemed so detailed about it. She showed me documents. Fake documents. Obviously fake documents, Emily had shrieked. She knew you were reporting back to us. She knew from the beginning. She's been 3 steps ahead this entire time, and you led us in the wrong direction. The call had ended with Emily hanging up on Rachel, who I imagined was sitting wherever she was, finally understanding that I'd used her. That every coffee date, every confidential conversation, every detail I'd shared about my strategy had been carefully crafted misinformation designed to send my family chasing ghosts while I prepared my real attack from a completely different angle. The humiliation of being outsmarted so thoroughly was apparently devastating for them. Martha said my father kept muttering about how he'd underestimated Crystal and how she's smarter than I gave her credit for. The man who'd dismissed my academic achievements my entire childhood was finally realizing that intelligence he'd minimized had been turned against him with surgical precision. But Emily was suffering the most. With graduation now less than 3 weeks away, she'd completely fallen apart. Martha visited her apartment once and found it a disaster, curtains drawn, dirty dishes piled everywhere, Emily in pajamas at 3 p.m, looking like she hadn't showered in days. She's having panic attacks, Martha told me quietly. Real ones. Can't breathe, chest pain, the whole thing. She started seeing a therapist in desperation, some emergency sessions. What does the therapist say? I asked, curious despite myself. Apparently, the therapist suggested Emily should reach out to you directly, apologize sincerely, take responsibility, try to open a dialogue. Martha paused. But Emily's too proud, or too scared. Maybe both. And your father forbids it anyway, says anything Emily says to you could be used against them legally. So Emily was trapped, caught between consequences she'd never imagined and an inability to genuinely take responsibility. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop obsessively checking social media for any sign of my activity. She'd apparently created fake accounts to try to see if I'd posted anything, not realizing I'd been completely dark for a week. She's terrified you're going to show up at graduation, Martha said. She's convinced you'll stand up during the ceremony and expose everything in front of everyone. Or that you'll release some kind of evidence to the media right before. She can't focus on anything else. It's all she talks about. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, remembering that diary entry about the empty feeling behind all her privileges. But then I remembered the student loans taken out in my name, the destroyed credit score, the decades of watching her receive everything while I got nothing. The sympathy didn't last long, On day 7 of my silent retreat, I sat on my private cabin's deck watching the sun set over the mountains, a glass of wine in my hand. Tomorrow I'd return to the city, turn my phone back on, resume contact with the world. But this week of strategic absence had accomplished more than any active campaign could have. I'd let them destroy themselves with uncertainty, let their guilty consciences and paranoid imaginations create scenarios far worse than my actual plans. Let them understand finally that I wasn't the powerless daughter they'd always assumed I was. Letting them imagine what I might do next was more terrifying than any action I could take. And the best part was they were right to be terrified, because what came next would be worse than anything they'd imagined. I returned to the city on April 22nd, turned my phone back on, and watched it explode with 2 weeks of missed messages. 73 voicemails, over 200 texts, email after email from my father's various addresses. The tone progressing from demanding to pleading to threatening and back again. I deleted them all without listening or reading. They'd had my silence. Now they'd have something worse, my presence. Emily's graduation was May 7th, a Saturday. The ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon, followed by a party at the Riverside Estate, one of those upscale restaurants with crystal chandeliers, and a reputation for hosting events for people who wanted everyone to know they had money. Martha had been invited and told explicitly she could bring a +1. She'd asked if I wanted to be her guest. I'd smiled and said yes. I spent the morning of May 7th getting ready with the same care a general might prepare for battle. Hair appointment at 9, sleek, professional, elegant. Makeup at 11, subtle but flawless. The dress I'd chosen was a deep navy silk that had cost more than my father's monthly mortgage payment, used to be designer label, perfectly tailored. Pearl earrings that had been my first major purchase after becoming a millionaire. Shoes that were both beautiful and expensive enough to make a statement. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone who belonged in boardrooms and society galas. Someone who radiated quiet power and success. Not the struggling daughter they'd imagined, but a woman who'd built an empire while they'd squandered stolen money on cheap imitations of class. Martha picked me up at 1:30. She took one look at me and whispered, "Oh, they're going to lose their minds." She looked elegant herself in a silver dress I'd bought her for the occasion, pearls at her throat. We looked like exactly what we were, women who'd earned their place in any room. The Riverside Estate was already packed when we arrived at 4 o'clock, fashionably late to the reception that had started at 3. The ceremony itself was over. Emily had walked, received her diploma holder, and was presumably now celebrating with the degree she might or might not get to keep once the university's investigation concluded. The restaurant's private event space was filled with at least 60 guests, maybe more. Crystal chandeliers caught the late afternoon light. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Martha and I stood in the entrance for just a moment, long enough for people to notice. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. I saw the recognition ripple through the crowd like a wave. That's Crystal, the daughter who wasn't invited. What is she doing here? My father saw me first. He'd been talking to someone near the bar, and his face went through an extraordinary range of expressions: shock, panic, anger, and something that might have been fear. Linda stood near the gift table, her hand flying to her mouth. Emily was across the room, surrounded by friends, and when someone nudged her and pointed in my direction, all color drained from her face. Martha and I walked in like we owned the place. No hesitation, no apology. Martha greeted several relatives, warmly introducing me as my niece Crystal, who's been so successful in her consulting career. I shook hands, smiled politely, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. My father started toward us, but Aunt Caroline intercepted him, asking something about the timeline for speeches. He was trapped, unable to confront me without causing a scene that would make him look unreasonable. After all, Martha had every right to bring a guest. And I was family despite their best efforts to erase me. I worked my way through the room with deliberate grace, making small talk with relatives I barely knew, accepting their surprised congratulations on my own success. Yes, the consulting business is going very well. Thank you for asking. Several guests mentioned they'd heard there were some family complications and looked at me with curious sympathy. Word had spread about the investigation, the academic fraud, the financial irregularities. I smiled mysteriously and said nothing, letting their imaginations fill the gaps. Finally, inevitably, I came face to face with Emily. She stood frozen near the dessert table, her friends forming an uncertain cluster around her. She looked beautiful in a white graduation dress, but her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands shook slightly. The stress of the past month had carved new hollows in her face. "Emily," I said warmly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Congratulations. You've worked so hard for this moment." I raised my champagne glass in a toast, and nearby guests automatically joined in, creating a small crowd focused on us. "This is such an important milestone. Enjoy it, you've certainly earned everything coming to you." Emily's face went pale. She heard the double meaning in those last words, even if no one else did. Everything coming to you. All the consequences she'd been dreading, all the fallout from her fraud and theft and participation in my abuse. It was all coming for her, and she knew it. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. "I hope the investigation concludes favorably." I continued, my voice still perfectly pleasant. Several guests' eyes widened at the mention of investigation. Academic fraud inquiries can be so stressful, I imagine. Emily looked like she might cry or vomit or both. Before she could respond, there was a commotion at the entrance. A courier in a professional uniform stood talking to the hostess, holding a large manila envelope. The hostess pointed toward my father, and the courier made his way through the crowd. I'd timed this perfectly with Daniel. 4:00 on a Saturday, right in the middle of the celebration. The courier stopped in front of my father and said loud enough to be heard, "Richard Robbins, I have legal documents requiring signature confirmation of receipt." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to watch as my father, face burning red, signed for the envelope. The courier left, and my father stood there holding documents that everyone in the room knew meant trouble. His hands shook as he opened the envelope and began reading. I watched his face drain of color. Linda came rushing over, reading over his shoulder, and she actually gasped out loud. Someone asked, "Richard, is everything okay?" My father tried to smile, tried to play it off. "Oh, it's just some paperwork, nothing important. You know how lawyers are." But his voice cracked slightly, and everyone could see the panic in his eyes. The formal notice Daniel had prepared was comprehensive. Notification that Crystal Robbins, as legal co-owner of the property at their address, was initiating immediate audit of all financial transactions related to the house purchase mortgage and related trust fund distributions. Notice that irregularities would be reported to appropriate authorities, including the district attorney's office and the IRS. Notice that any further attempts to transfer, sell, or encumber the property would be met with immediate legal action and criminal complaint. The party tried to continue, but the atmosphere was ruined. Conversations became strained. Guests kept glancing at my parents and whispering. Emily disappeared into the bathroom. I stood near the windows overlooking the river, sipping champagne, watching my family's celebration disintegrate around them. Finally, I raised my glass one more time, catching Emily's eye as she emerged from the bathroom with fresh makeup, poorly concealing her tear-stained face. "Congratulations, Emily," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Truly." But my tone, calm, cold, final, made Emily's blood run cold. And everyone in that room knew that whatever was happening in this family, it wasn't over. It had barely begun. The party was limping along, guests pretending to enjoy themselves while sneaking glances at my parents, who were huddled in a corner reading the legal documents with increasing horror. I decided it was time to twist the knife a little deeper. I walked over to where my father and Linda stood, their faces ashen as they read Daniel's formal notice for the third time, as if the words might change with repetition. Emily hovered nearby, trying to hear what they were whispering to each other. A small cluster of relatives and family friends had gravitated toward the drama like moths to flame, pretending to admire the flower arrangements, while obviously eavesdropping. "Dad," I said pleasantly, reaching into my clutch, "I brought something for you. Since we're all here together celebrating, I thought it would be a good time to clear up any confusion." I handed him a manila folder, professionally bound, the contents already marked with yellow highlighter. My father took it like it might explode. His hands were shaking. "This is the complete property title documentation for the house," I said, clearly, my voice carrying to the growing audience around us. "The refinancing paperwork from last April when I saved you from foreclosure. Page 12, Section C, highlighted in yellow, that's the important part." My father flipped to page 12 with fumbling fingers. I watched his face as he read the section, watched the moment comprehension hit him like a physical blow. Linda leaned over his shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth. "As you can see," I continued in that same pleasant tone, "when I refinanced your mortgage 8 months ago, the new title lists all owners of the property, Richard Robbins, Linda Robbins, and Crystal Robbins, as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. That means I legally own 1/3 of that house. Any transfer of property requires unanimous consent from all owners." "This can't be right," my father said, but his voice had no conviction. He was flipping through the pages now, seeing his own signature on document after document, seeing the title change he'd apparently never noticed in his desperate rush to save the house from foreclosure. "Oh, it's very right," I said. "I had my attorney structure it that way. You signed everything, Dad. 73 pages of legal documentation. Did you read it all? Did you have your own lawyer review it before signing?" I already knew the answer. They'd been too panicked, too desperate, too convinced of their own entitlement to think Crystal's generosity might come with strings attached. A family friend, a woman named Margaret, who I vaguely remembered from childhood church events, spoke up. "But Richard, didn't you tell everyone you were giving Emily the house as a graduation gift? How could you give her a house you don't fully own?" My father's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Linda jumped in her voice, shrill. "This is a misunderstanding. Crystal is twisting things. We can work this out as a family." "By work this out, do you mean forge more signatures?" I asked coolly. "Because that's what you did with my mother's trust fund. Forged my signature on waiver documents. Forged transfer authorizations. Should we discuss that here, or would you prefer to wait for the criminal investigation?" The words "criminal investigation" rippled through the nearby guests like an electric shock. I saw several people pull out their phones, probably texting other family members who weren't present. The scandal was spreading in real time. Then, as if choreographed by divine timing, though it was actually choreographed by Daniel Chen with precision, my father's cell phone rang. He glanced at the screen and went even paler. "It's the bank," he muttered. "You should probably answer that," I said sweetly. "They're calling about the ownership verification. They have some questions about the transfer paperwork you filed last week trying to deed the house to Emily." My father had attempted to transfer the house, even after receiving legal notice about my co-ownership. The audacity was breathtaking. I watched as he stepped away from the group phone pressed to his ear, his voice tight and defensive as he answered. I couldn't hear his entire conversation, but his increasing volume made it audible to most of the party. "Yes, this is Richard Robbins." "What do you mean, irregularities? I don't understand what you're talking about." "No, I was aware of the joint ownership." "Of course I was. I just thought, what do you mean, attempted transfer?" "That was just preliminary paperwork." "No, my daughter didn't sign it because—" He was spiraling, contradicting himself, obviously lying. The bank representative, one of Daniel's contacts who owed him favors, was asking questions designed to make my father hang himself with his own words. Questions about whether he understood that forging a co-owner's signature on transfer documents was fraud. Questions about the trust fund deposits that had been used for the down payment. Questions about whether the transfer attempt was related to the ongoing investigation into financial crimes involving the property. When my father returned to the group, he was sweating despite the restaurant's excellent air conditioning. His collar looked too tight, his hands were trembling. "Everything okay?" someone asked with obvious false concern. "Fine, everything's fine. Just a banking error," my father said, but everyone could see it was not fine. More guests were making excuses to leave now. So sorry, we have another commitment. Early morning tomorrow. Thank you for inviting us, this was lovely. The party was hemorrhaging attendees. Emily's academic advisor, a distinguished professor who'd come to celebrate his promising student, approached Emily and said something in a low voice. I was close enough to hear his words. Emily, I think given the ongoing investigation and these new developments, it would be best if you and I didn't have contact until everything is resolved. I'm sorry. He left without saying goodbye to my parents. Two scholarship representatives who'd been chatting near the bar quietly collected their coats. No one wanted to be photographed at a party for a family under investigation for fraud and theft. Social contamination was real in their circles, and they were smart enough to distance themselves immediately. Emily finally broke. She pushed through the remaining guests and ran toward the bathroom, her hand over her mouth. Linda followed, calling, "Emily, honey, wait!" The bathroom door slammed. Through it, we could all hear muffled shouting. "You promised me that house!" Emily's voice raw with tears and rage. "You said it was mine. You said Crystal didn't matter." "How were we supposed to know she'd do this?" Linda shot back. "How were we supposed to know she'd been planning this for months? She tricked us." I stood there listening to them blame everyone but themselves, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. They still didn't understand. Still didn't see that this was justice, not trickery. Still couldn't grasp that stealing from your daughter and then trying to steal from her again might have consequences. The bathroom door opened. Emily emerged, mascara running, eyes red. She looked at me with something between hatred and despair. I walked over to her, slowly aware that the remaining guests were watching. I kept my voice quiet but clear enough for nearby people to hear. "Did you still think you deserved that house, Emily?" She couldn't answer, just stood there crying while her perfect graduation party collapsed around her, while guests whispered and left, while the future she'd been promised evaporated like smoke. I left the graduation party while it was still limping along, Martha at my side. Emily had retreated to a corner booth surrounded by her few remaining loyal friends, all of them looking shell-shocked. My father and Linda were attempting damage control, smiling too widely at guests who were clearly making excuses to leave. As Martha and I walked toward the exit, I paused at the doorway and turned back one last time. My father caught my eye across the room. For a moment, we just looked at each other. The man who'd never been a real father and the daughter he'd tried to erase. I smiled small and cold and said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, and that was just step one. The words hung in the air as Martha and I walked out into the spring evening. Behind us, I heard someone ask, "What did she mean by that?" I didn't stay to hear the answer. 2 days later, on Monday morning at precisely 9 a.m., a process server appeared at my parents' front door. I wasn't there to see it, but Martha called me immediately after, breathless, with something between horror and satisfaction. "Crystal, they just got served. Your father opened the door in his bathrobe and this man handed him this huge envelope of legal documents." Linda started crying before she even read them. Daniel had crafted the cease and desist with devastating precision. 27 pages of formal legal language detailing every crime, every fraud, every violation my parents had committed over the past 2 decades. The document opened with a comprehensive list of allegations: fraudulent appropriation of minors' trust fund assets, identity theft under both state and federal statutes, forgery of legal documents, conspiracy to defraud, attempted property transfer through fraudulent means, and willful violation of fiduciary duty. Each allegation was supported by referenced evidence, exhibit numbers, document dates, bank statement, line items. Daniel had made it clear that we possessed overwhelming proof of every claim. The language was unambiguous. These weren't just civil matters, these were criminal acts that could result in federal prosecution and significant prison time. But Daniel, brilliant strategist that he was, had included an option. A single path to avoid criminal prosecution, full restitution of the trust fund principal, plus compound interest over 20 years calculated at $4.1 million. Complete transfer of all property rights in the house to Crystal as sole owner. public acknowledgement of wrongdoing in the form of a notarized statement, and immediate cessation of all contact with Crystal, except through legal representatives. The deadline was 30 days. June 7th. Exactly 1 month to come up with over $4 million or face criminal charges that would almost certainly result in conviction given the paper trail we'd assembled. My father called Daniel's office within an hour. The paralegal reported that he was incoherent with rage and panic, demanding to speak to me directly, threatening to sue for harassment, then pivoting to begging for a meeting to discuss terms. Daniel's paralegal very professionally told him that all communication must be in writing, and that the terms were non-negotiable. The call ended with my father screaming that we were trying to destroy his family. That same afternoon, something unexpected happened. A courier arrived at my office with a package, no return address, no identifying information, just my name typed on a label. My assistant brought it to me, and I opened it carefully, half expecting some kind of threat or harassment from my family. Instead, I found documents that made my hands shake. Original trust fund paperwork, not copies. The actual papers with visible ink signatures that could be forensically analyzed. Internal bank memos from 15 years ago discussing concerning withdrawal patterns, and questionable authorization signatures on the trust account memos that had apparently been buried by someone. Photocopies of checks showing direct transfers from the trust to my parents' personal checking accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars over years. These were the smoking guns Marcus's investigation hadn't been able to obtain. These were originals that could only have come from someone with inside access to either the bank or my parents' personal files. Someone had taken extraordinary risk to copy these and send them to me. There was no note, no explanation, no signature, just evidence that would make any criminal case absolutely ironclad. I called Daniel immediately. Someone sent me originals, bank documents, trust paperwork, everything. Who? His voice was sharp with professional interest. No idea. Anonymous delivery. I was already photographing each document, creating backups. Could this be admissible if we don't know the source? Absolutely, as long as they're authentic. Which they appear to be based on what you're describing. This is huge crystal. With originals, we can do forensic signature analysis, prove forgery beyond any doubt. This moves from very strong case to guaranteed conviction territory. I stared at the documents spread across my desk, trying to figure out who would have done this. Someone in the family who'd finally grown a conscience, a bank employee who'd been troubled by the buried memos, or, and this seemed most likely given the access required, Emily herself finally doing something right after years of complicity. If it was Emily, she hadn't included a note asking for forgiveness or explaining herself. Just evidence. Just truth. Maybe that was all she could manage. Maybe it was enough. The media attention started that Wednesday. A reporter from the local news station called my father's work, asking for comment on allegations that Mr. Robbins and his wife misappropriated their daughter's inheritance trust fund. My father, according to Martha, who heard about it from a concerned cousin, had denied everything and hung up. But the damage was done. His employer, a mid-sized manufacturing firm that valued its reputation, immediately called him into a meeting with Human Resources and the company's legal counsel. There are allegations circulating that might reflect poorly on the company. They told him, according to the carefully worded letter he received afterward that Martha managed to get a glimpse of. We need to place you on administrative leave pending resolution of these matters. This is not a termination, but we cannot have someone under investigation for financial crimes in a senior management position. Administrative leave. Fancy words for, you're suspended without being fired yet. My father's 25-year career was now on hold, his reputation in tatters, his income suspended at exactly the moment he needed money most desperately. Emily's university also acted. The academic investigation had concluded that Emily had indeed committed fraud, falsified documents, paid someone to complete courses in her name, used someone else's identity for financial aid. The degree she'd walked for at graduation was officially withheld. She had participated in a ceremony, smiled for photos, thrown her cap in the air, but legally, she didn't have a bachelor's degree. The diploma was denied pending potential reapplication after completing ethics coursework and retaking the courses she'd fraudulently completed. Her LinkedIn profile still said BA in Marketing State University, but it was a lie, and everyone in her network was starting to know it. I sat in my office that Friday evening looking at the anonymous documents at the cease and desist terms my family would never be able to meet at the news clippings Martha had sent about local family under investigation, and I felt the full weight of what I'd set in motion. They were being destroyed systematically, legally, financially, socially, professionally. Everything they'd built on lies and stolen money was crumbling, and I'd barely begun. The video appeared online 3 days after the graduation party. I was at my office reviewing quarterly reports when Martha called, her voice tight with a mixture of horror and vindication. "Crystal, you need to check social media. Someone posted a video from the party. It's spreading everywhere." I pulled up Facebook on my computer and found it immediately. The video had been shared in our local community group with the caption, "Entitled woman has public meltdown when sister won't give her a house." 1,200 shares already, 800 comments, and it was only an hour old. The footage was shaky, clearly shot on someone's phone from across the restaurant event space, but the audio was crystal clear. Emily screaming at our parents near the dessert table, her voice raw and unhinged. "You promised me that house. You said it was mine. You said Crystal didn't matter." Then her mother's response just as damning. "How were we supposed to know she'd do this? She tricked us." The video caught Emily grabbing a champagne glass and throwing it against the wall where it shattered spectacularly. Caught her sobbing hysterically while guests backed away. Caught my father trying to calm her down while she screamed, "I hate her, she's ruining my life." It was 37 seconds of pure, unfiltered entitlement and dysfunction. And it was going viral. I watched it 3 times, my emotions complicated. I hadn't orchestrated this. Emily's behavior had been so extreme, so public, that multiple guests had naturally pulled out their phones to record it. In an age where everyone documents everything, a dramatic scene at a party was inevitable content. But watching it spread, watching Emily's worst moment become entertainment for thousands of strangers, I felt something between satisfaction and discomfort. By the end of the day, the video had been picked up by a regional news site that specialized in viral content. They'd titled it, "Graduate Sister Refuses to Give Up House Chaos Ensues," and embedded it in an article that provided just enough context to make Emily look terrible. The comments section was brutal. "Imagine thinking you deserve a house your sister paid for. The entitlement is astounding. This is what happens when parents spoil one kid and neglect the other. Sister sounds like she's finally standing up for herself." The mom's response is the worst part. "How were we supposed to know she'd do this? You mean protect her own property rights, wild." Local Facebook groups exploded with people sharing their own stories of being the scapegoat child, the forgotten sibling, the one who was never good enough. They rallied around me, someone they'd never met, with fierce protective energy. Several people started digging into the public records, finding the property title information that showed I was indeed a co-owner, posting screenshots that validated my position. Emily's sister literally saved their house from foreclosure, and they tried to give it away. This family is garbage. Within a week, a local news station ran a story. They didn't use our names. A prominent local family is at the center of an inheritance dispute. But they included enough details that everyone in our community knew exactly who they were talking about. The reporter framed it as a David and Goliath story. Successful independent woman fights to recover stolen inheritance from family who raised her as second-class citizen. They'd clearly done their research, mentioning the trust fund, the forged signatures, the identity theft. Public opinion shifted so decisively against my family that they couldn't go anywhere without recognition. Martha reported that Linda was confronted at the grocery store by a woman who said, "You should be ashamed of yourself stealing from your own daughter." Emily was recognized at a coffee shop, and a group of young women at the next table spent 20 minutes loudly discussing how pathetic it was that she expected to be given a house she hadn't earned. Several people I'd gone to high school with reached out to me privately through LinkedIn and email. "I always knew your family treated you differently, but I didn't realize how bad it was. I'm so sorry I didn't say something." "I remember when you won that scholarship your senior year and your parents didn't even come to the award ceremony. It makes sense now. Your father told my dad you were difficult when you left home. Now I know he was lying. I'm sorry we believed him." The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and my family had lost decisively. The university made their official decision on May 21st. Emily's degree was formally revoked. The letter which Emily left on the kitchen counter where Martha saw it was unequivocal. "Based on conclusive evidence of academic dishonesty, fraudulent document submission, and identity theft in securing federal student loans, we are hereby revoking your bachelor's degree. You may reapply for admission after 1 year contingent upon completion of ethics coursework and demonstrated rehabilitation." She'd walked at graduation, posed for photos, celebrated with friends. But legally, officially, she didn't have a degree. The diploma she'd been promised would never arrive. The 4 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars, my stolen money, ironically had resulted in nothing but scandal and shame. The job offers evaporated immediately. The marketing firm in Chicago that had been Emily's dream position sent a terse email. "We regret to inform you that we are rescinding our offer of employment due to inconsistencies in your academic credentials." 2 other companies sent similar letters within days. Human resources departments had done their due diligence, discovered the degree revocation, and wanted nothing to do with the liability. Emily's apartment lease in Chicago, signed months ago in anticipation of her big move, was canceled. She lost the deposit. Her plans for independence, for starting her glamorous marketing career, for finally being free of her parents, all of it dissolved like sugar in water. She was back in her childhood bedroom, unemployed, disgraced, with a reputation that followed her everywhere online. The golden child's golden future had turned to ash, and everyone could see it happening in real time. I was in a meeting when my assistant knocked and said, "There's a journalist on the phone, Sarah Chen from the Tribune. She's asking for an interview about your family situation." Sarah Chen was a respected investigative reporter known for stories about financial fraud and family dynamics. Her request for an interview meant this story was going beyond viral videos and local gossip. This was becoming a legitimate news story about inheritance theft and family abuse. Daniel Chen called me within an hour. Sarah Chen reached out to me too, asking for confirmation about the legal case. "This is a big platform, Crystal. What she writes will be read by hundreds of thousands of people. Are you ready for that?" I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. "Yes," I said. "Set it up. I'll do the interview." Sarah Chen met me at a quiet cafe downtown on May 23rd, a week before the deadline I'd given my parents to meet the restitution terms. She was in her mid-40s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes that had clearly witnessed a lot of human suffering in her investigative career. We talked off the record for 20 minutes before she even turned on her recorder, establishing trust and boundaries. "I want to be clear about my approach," Sarah said. "I'm not interested in sensationalism or family drama for entertainment. I focus on systemic issues, financial abuse, inheritance theft, the ways families can exploit vulnerable members. Your story fits that pattern, but I need you to be honest with me, and I'll be honest with you in return." "I can do that," I said. The interview took 2 hours. Sarah asked thoughtful, probing questions that got to the heart of the emotional abuse without being exploitative. I told her about my childhood, about being the invisible daughter, about working 3 jobs while Emily got everything handed to her. I told her about the scholarship my father sabotaged, about leaving home at 18, with nothing about building a career through sheer determination. Then I told her about discovering the trust fund 8 months ago, about realizing my entire childhood had been built on theft, and lies about finding forged signatures and fake documents claiming I'd waived my inheritance. I spoke calmly, factually, letting the events speak for themselves without embellishment or bitterness. How did it feel when your father announced they were giving your house to your sister? Sarah asked. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Like being erased. Like 20 years of abuse condensed into one moment. They took my mother's money, my childhood, my opportunities, and then they tried to take the house I'd saved while expecting me to smile and accept it. That was when I finally understood they would never stop taking unless I stopped them. Sarah verified everything. She reviewed the property documents showing my co-ownership, examined the trust fund paperwork with Daniel's permission, spoke to Marcus Webb about his investigation findings. She even interviewed Aunt Martha, who provided decades of perspective on the family dynamics. The article Sarah produced was devastating in its thoroughness and restraint. It published online on May 26th with the headline, "The Invisible Daughter: How One Woman Fought Back Against a Family That Stole Her Inheritance." Within 6 hours, it had 200,000 views. Within 24 hours, it was trending on multiple platforms. The comments section was flooded with support, particularly from women over 50 who saw their own family stories reflected in mine. This is exactly what happened in my family. My brother got everything while I got nothing. Financial abuse is so rarely talked about. Thank you for sharing your story. The way she speaks about it with such composure, you can tell she's been surviving this her whole life. My family panicked. I know this because Martha called me that afternoon breathless. They're planning some kind of response. Your father hired a PR consultant. They want to hold a press conference tomorrow to tell their side. Against legal advice, I assume. I said, already knowing the answer. Daniel Chen already tried to stop them. He called your father and told him it would be legal suicide. But they're doing it anyway. They think they can fix this with spin. The press conference was held at a local hotel conference room on May 27th. About 20 people showed up: reporters, curious community members, a few loyal family friends. My father stood at a podium with Linda and Emily flanking him, all three of them looking like they'd aged 5 years and 5 weeks. I watched the live stream from my office, a sort of horrified fascination keeping me glued to the screen. My father started with a prepared statement. We want to address the false and misleading information that has been circulating about our family. Crystal is our daughter, and we've always loved both our daughters equally. The situation with the trust fund was a misunderstanding, and the property dispute is a family matter that's being taken out of context. A reporter immediately raised her hand. Mr. Robbins, if you loved both daughters equally, why did Crystal grow up doing all the household chores while Emily was exempt? Why did you sabotage Crystal's college scholarship? My father stammered. Those are exaggerations. Crystal was always dramatic. She misremembered. I'm reading from sworn testimony your own sister-in-law provided, the reporter said coolly. Are you calling her a liar? Linda jumped in. Emily is the real victim here. She's lost her degree, her job prospects, her reputation, all because Crystal decided to wage this vindictive campaign against us. Another reporter spoke up. Mrs. Robbins, the $2.3 million trust fund that belonged to Crystal, where is that money now? Silence. My father and Linda exchanged panicked glances. Emily started crying. That's a complex financial matter that we can't discuss in detail, my father finally said. Can't or won't, the reporter pressed. Did you or did you not use Crystal's inheritance for personal expenses? No comment. Did you forge Crystal's signature on trust fund documents? No comment. The no comments sounded like confessions. The video of their press conference went even more viral than Sarah Chen's article. Local social media erupted with hashtags, #where is the trust fund, #justice for Crystal, #inheritance, theft. The press conference they'd hoped would rehabilitate their image instead provided more ammunition for public condemnation. Daniel called me within an hour of the press conference ending. They just handed prosecutors a gift. They contradicted themselves, deflected, refused to answer direct questions about forgery and theft. Their own statements can be used as evidence of consciousness of guilt. Did their lawyer approve this? Their lawyer, they hired someone, finally apparently told them explicitly not to do it. They did it anyway because they're desperate and delusional. Daniel sounded almost amused. The DA's office just issued a statement that they're reviewing evidence of potential financial crimes. Your family's press conference put enough public pressure on them that they have to act now. I sat at my desk watching the clips circulate, watching my family destroy themselves in real time with their own words and non-words. They'd tried to control the narrative and instead lost control of everything. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Crystal. My father's voice, stripped of all his usual authority, sounding old and broken. We need to talk. I said nothing, waiting. Please. Just can we meet, just you and me? No lawyers. I need to explain things. I need you to understand. He was begging now, actually begging. There are things you don't know, things about your mother, about why. Just please, give me one conversation. I looked at the deadline calendar on my wall. June 7th, 10 days away. 10 days for them to somehow produce $4 million they didn't have, or face criminal prosecution they couldn't escape. Fine, I said. One conversation. Tomorrow, noon, at Martha's house with Martha present. I wasn't meeting him alone, wasn't giving him the chance to manipulate or threaten without a witness. Thank you, he said, his voice cracking. Thank you, Crystal. I hung up and stared at my phone, wondering what my father could possibly say that would make any of this forgivable, wondering what truth he was finally ready to tell. I arrived at Aunt Martha's house at 11:45 on May 28th, giving myself time to set up before my father arrived. Daniel had provided me with a small digital recorder that looked like a pen legal in our state as long as one party to the conversation consented, and I was consenting to recording myself. Martha made tea neither of us would drink and sat in her armchair near the window, a silent witness to whatever was about to unfold. My father arrived exactly at noon, and the man who walked through Martha's door was barely recognizable. He'd lost at least 15 pounds, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that had always carried itself with inflated authority. His face was gray, deep lines carved around his mouth and eyes. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the 2 months since Christmas dinner. His hands shook slightly as he accepted Martha's offer of tea. Thank you for agreeing to meet, he said, not quite looking at me. I know you have no reason to give me this time. You're right, I said flatly. I don't. But you said you had something to tell me, some truth I need to hear. So talk. He sat on Martha's couch, setting his untouched tea on the side table. Before we get into that, I wanted to discuss the possibility of a settlement. If we could negotiate terms that work for both of us. No. I cut him off. I'm not here to negotiate. You have until June 7th to meet the terms Daniel laid out or face criminal prosecution. Those are your only options. If that's all you came to say, this conversation is over. Crystal, please. Truth, I said. You promised me truth. That's the only thing I'm interested in hearing from you. He was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Your mother, Sarah. I didn't love her. I married her for money and connections. The words hung in the air. Martha drew in a sharp breath. I felt something cold settle in my chest, though I wasn't entirely surprised. I'd suspected something like this based on old diary entries and family dynamics, but hearing him say it out loud was still a gut punch. I was 26, ambitious, working a dead-end job at a manufacturing plant. Sarah was from old money, the Chambers family. We met at a charity event her family was hosting. She was beautiful, educated, sophisticated, everything I wasn't, but wanted to be. He looked up at me, then his eyes pleading for understanding he didn't deserve. Marrying her opened every door I'd been banging my head against. Her family got me into better circles, better job opportunities. I built my career on her family name. Did she know? I asked, my voice steady, despite the rage building in my chest. Did she know you were using her? I don't think so. She loved me, really loved me, and He faltered. I cared about her, just not the way she deserved. When she got sick, when the doctors said it was terminal, I felt guilty. But I also felt... He stopped, swallowed hard. Relieved. Like I was finally going to be free from a mistake I'd made out of ambition. And then she left me the trust fund, I said, understanding clicking into place. She left me millions because she wanted to protect me from you. He nodded slowly. She was smart. She knew what kind of man I really was by the end. The trust was her way of ensuring you'd be taken care of even after she was gone, even if I wasn't the father she hoped I'd be. But you stole it anyway. I met Linda 6 months after Sarah died. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. Linda was everything Sarah wasn't: warm, uncomplicated someone I actually chose because I wanted her, not because of what she could give me. When Emily was born, she was my real daughter. The daughter from the marriage I actually wanted. The family I'd actually chosen. The words were like knives. Real daughter. As if I wasn't real. As if my entire existence was less legitimate because I was the product of his ambition rather than his love. And looking at you, he said, his voice breaking, you looked so much like Sarah. Same eyes, same serious expression. Every time I saw you, I was reminded of my own greed, my own moral failure. I couldn't love you because loving you meant acknowledging what I'd done. So it was easier to just distance myself, focus on Emily and Linda, build the family I should have waited for in the first place. So you neglected me, I said, emotionally abused me, made me feel worthless my entire childhood because you couldn't face your own shame. The trust fund. He continued, his rationalizations tumbling out now like he'd been holding them in for decades. We thought since it was Sarah's money and you'd eventually inherit our estate anyway when we died, it was logical to use it for the family, for things we all benefited from. The house, Emily's education. It all stayed in the family, so what did it matter? It mattered because it was mine. I said, my voice ice. My mother left it specifically for me with instructions that it secure my future. Not yours, not Emily's, mine. But as the years went by and Emily became the center of our lives, it just seemed more fair that she should have everything. His twisted logic was astonishing. She was the daughter I actually chose, the daughter from love. You were a reminder of a transaction, of a time when I was mercenary and ambitious in the worst ways. I couldn't give you what you needed because giving you love meant admitting what I'd done to your mother. I stared at this man who'd never been a real father, watching him try to explain away decades of abuse and theft as if it were somehow reasonable, as if his emotional dysfunction justified stealing from a child, as if his inability to face his own moral failures meant I deserved to suffer. Do you hear yourself? I asked. You're explaining child neglect and financial fraud as if they're logical choices, as if your feelings about your dead wife justify what you did to her daughter. I'm trying to make you understand. I understand perfectly. I cut him off. You're a man who married for money, felt guilty about it, and took that guilt out on an innocent child for 35 years. You stole from me, lied to me, made me feel worthless, and even now sitting here facing prison, you still think you can manipulate me into sympathy. Crystal, please. I'm not someone you can control anymore, I said, standing up. That's what you've never understood. I'm not that scared little girl who needed your approval. I'm not the broken daughter you tried to erase. I'm the woman who's going to ensure you face every consequence you've spent a lifetime avoiding. I walked toward this door, done with this conversation, done with him. The deadline stands, I said without turning around. $4 million by June 7th, or Daniel files criminal charges. Those are your options. Choose wisely. I left him sitting on Martha's couch, a broken man finally forced to confront the ruins of his own making. The deadline passed on June 7th without a word from my family. No payment, no negotiation attempt. Just silence that spoke louder than any plea could have. On June 8th, Daniel filed the comprehensive evidence package with the district attorney's office and simultaneously released redacted versions to the media. The documentation was damning in its thoroughness. Daniel had assembled everything into a narrative timeline that even someone with no legal training could follow. The original trust document from 1989 showing my mother, Sarah Chambers Robbins, establishing a $2.3 million fund for her daughter, Crystal. Bank statements showing the account growing over years with compound interest and wise investments reaching $3.8 million by my 21st birthday. Then the systematic withdrawals beginning immediately after that milestone, 50,000 here, 100,000 there, each one accompanied by forged authorization documents claiming to bear my signature. Daniel included side-by-side comparisons of the forged signatures with my actual signature from the same time periods. Even to an untrained eye, the differences were obvious. Wrong letter formations, inconsistent pressure, tells that any forensic document examiner would catch immediately. He included the fake correspondence I'd supposedly written, requesting the trust be transferred to family management letters in handwriting. Nothing like mine discussing plans I'd never made. But the most damaging evidence was the paper trail showing exactly where the money went. $300,000 for the house down payment in 2010, $90,000 for kitchen and bathroom renovations in 2013, $65,000 for a European vacation in 2015, $45,000 for Emily's 16th birthday car, $120,000 for Emily's private school tuition over 4 years. Luxury purchases, family expenses, investments in my father's retirement accounts, a complete accounting of my inheritance being spent on everyone except me while I struggled through college on loans and worked multiple jobs to survive. The local newspaper ran the story with the headline, "Prominent local family accused of stealing daughter's $2 million inheritance over 2 decades." By evening, it had been picked up by regional news outlets. By morning, it was trending nationally on several platforms. The calculated long-term nature of the theft shocked people. This wasn't a single act of desperation or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was systematic financial abuse of a child spanning 20 years. The district attorney's office issued a statement on June 9th. Our office has received comprehensive evidence of potential financial crimes, including fraud, identity theft, forgery, and embezzlement of minor trust assets. We are conducting a formal investigation and will pursue appropriate charges if the evidence warrants prosecution. That was prosecutor speak for, "These people are going down." Daniel explained that the DA's office rarely made public statements about ongoing investigations unless they were confident in the strength of the case. The evidence was too overwhelming, the public pressure too intense for them to look the other way. My parents' lawyer, a criminal defense attorney they'd finally hired, reportedly told them their options were stark: negotiate a plea deal that included full restitution, property forfeiture, and probation, or face trial where they would almost certainly be convicted and receive prison sentences. Emily, who'd participated in the identity theft and document forgery, faced her own charges. Lesser than her parents, but still potentially life-ruining with a federal identity theft conviction. Daniel called me on June 10th and asked me to come to his office for a meeting. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you years ago." I arrived at his office that afternoon to find him standing by his floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, hands clasped behind his back. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, weighted down by something heavy. "Sit down, Crystal," he said softly. "Please." I sat and he settled into the chair across from me, not behind his imposing desk but beside me as equals. Or perhaps I would come to understand as something closer to family. "I knew your mother," he began, and my breath caught. "Sarah Chambers. We were business partners 30 years ago. She had a gift for strategic investment much like you do. We worked together on several commercial real estate deals. She taught me as much about reading markets as any formal education ever did." He pulled out an old photograph from his desk drawer, faded with age. A younger version of Daniel stood next to a beautiful woman with dark hair and my eyes. My mother. They were standing in front of a building under construction, both smiling, both looking successful and confident. When she got sick, when she knew she was dying, she made me promise something. His voice cracked. She said, "Daniel, please watch over my daughter. Richard isn't who I thought he was, and I'm afraid of what will happen to Crystal after I'm gone. Promise me you'll protect her." And I promised. Tears were forming in my eyes. I blinked them back, trying to focus. "Your father cut off all contact after Sarah died. He blocked my calls, returned my letters, made it clear I wasn't welcome in your life. I couldn't intervene legally. I wasn't your guardian, had no legal standing. You were a minor under his custody. I felt helpless." He reached across and took my hand. "But Martha, she and I stayed in contact secretly. She would send me updates about you over the years, about how they were treating you, about your achievements they ignored, about your struggles." "The job after college?" I said slowly, pieces clicking together. "The one at Morrison Financial. You recommended me." He nodded. "I called in a favor with their CEO. Told him I knew a brilliant young analyst he needed to meet. I never told them you were Sarah's daughter, just that you had potential. You earned that position with your own abilities, Crystal. I just opened the door. And the emergency fund when I was 22, when I was nearly evicted. $2,000 from an anonymous donor through a nonprofit grant," he confirmed. "That was me. You were desperate, working yourself to exhaustion, one missed paycheck from homelessness. I couldn't let Sarah's daughter end up on the street." Other memories surfaced. The investment conference I'd been invited to at 25, where I'd made connections that launched my consulting career. The client who'd specifically requested me for a major project that established my reputation. Doors that had opened at exactly the right moments, opportunities that seemed fortunate, but now I understood were engineered. "You've been watching over me my whole adult life," I whispered. "I made a promise to your mother," Daniel said, tears running down his face now. "I couldn't save you from your childhood. I couldn't stop them from stealing your trust fund because I didn't know about it until you came to me last January. But I've been protecting you however I could, making sure you had chances to build the life Sarah wanted for you, making sure her daughter survived and thrived despite everything they did to break you." I was crying now, really crying for the first time through this entire ordeal. Not from pain or anger, but from the overwhelming realization that I hadn't been completely alone, that my mother's love had reached across decades through this man's quiet guardianship, through his kept promise. "Your mother would be so proud of who you became," Daniel said. "She'd be proud of your strength, your intelligence, your success, despite impossible odds. And she'd be proud that you finally stood up for yourself and demanded justice." I stood and hugged him, this man who'd been a silent guardian angel for half my life, and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for keeping your promise to her." He pulled back and looked at me with determination. "Your mother trusted me to protect you. Now let's finish this." The week after Daniel's revelation, I decided it was time to play my final card, the one I'd been holding since last summer, long before the Christmas dinner that had started this war. The corporate takeover that would strip my father of the last thing he valued, his professional identity. I'd begun acquiring shares in Tech Corporation in July of last year, 6 months before Christmas. Even then, I'd sensed something was brewing with my family. Martha had mentioned they were talking about Emily's graduation gifts and estate planning, and my instincts told me to prepare for betrayal. So I'd started positioning pieces on a chessboard my father didn't even know existed. Tech was a mid-sized manufacturing company, privately held, but with shares distributed among about 40 investors. My father had worked there for 25 years, climbing from production manager to senior vice president of operations. It was his whole identity, his pride, the source of his self-worth. And I'd been quietly buying it out from under him. I used 3 different shell companies to structure the purchases, keeping each transaction below the reporting thresholds that would trigger ownership disclosure requirements. Cascade Investment Group bought 18% in July and August. Northern Capital Holdings acquired 15% in September through November. Summit Ventures picked up 19% between December and February. Different names, different registered agents, different banks, all leading back to me through layers of corporate structure designed for anonymity. By March, I owned 52% of Tech Manu Corporation. Controlling interest. The power to call shareholder meetings, propose restructuring vote in new board members, and eliminate positions. All for approximately $8 million of my own money, expensive but worth every penny for what came next. I scheduled the emergency shareholder meeting for June 24th, providing the legally required notice to all shareholders and board members. The meeting agenda listed simply, Corporate Restructuring Proposal, Majority Shareholder Initiative. The boardroom at Tech Manu's headquarters was elegant, all dark wood and leather chairs with windows overlooking the industrial park where the manufacturing facilities operated. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal business suit that cost more than my father's monthly mortgage payment used to be, carrying a leather portfolio that contained documents that would destroy his career. The board members arrived greeting each other with that casual familiarity of people who'd worked together for years. My father came in looking haggard, the stress of the past months evident in every line of his face. He was talking to another VP about quarterly production numbers when I walked to the head of the conference table and took my seat in the chairman's position. The conversation stopped. People looked at me with confusion and curiosity. My father's face went from puzzlement to recognition to absolute horror in the space of 3 seconds. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said calmly. "For those who don't know me, my name is Crystal Robbins. I'm the majority shareholder of this corporation, having acquired 52% of outstanding shares over the past 11 months through various investment vehicles." I watched my father's face drain of all color. He gripped the edge of the table like he might fall without it. "As majority shareholder," I continued, "I've called this meeting to propose immediate restructuring aimed at improving operational efficiency and profitability. I've had independent consultants review our financials and operations, and they've identified several areas where we're carrying unnecessary overhead." I distributed packets to each board member, comprehensive analyses that Marcus Webb had helped me prepare, showing redundancies in upper management positions that could be eliminated or consolidated without impacting actual operations. It was all legitimate business strategy, the kind of restructuring that happens in companies every day. Specifically, I said, flipping to page 7 of the packet, I'm proposing we eliminate 3 senior vice president positions and restructure their responsibilities across remaining management. This will save the company approximately $680,000 annually in salary and benefits. One of the other board members, a man named Harrison, studied the proposal. "Which positions are you proposing to eliminate?" "Senior VP of Operations, Senior VP of Business Development, and Senior VP of Strategic Planning." All 3 were my father's contemporaries, men who'd climbed the ladder with him. But my father's position was the most prominent, the highest paid, the one with the most authority. "This seems rather drastic," another board member said. "These are long-tenured employees." "Which is why," I said smoothly, "I'm proposing we offer generous early retirement packages to those affected, 6-month salary, full benefits for 1 year, and assistance with job placement services. Alternatively, affected employees can accept demotion to analyst positions at adjusted salary levels appropriate to those roles." My father found his voice finally. "You can't do this. This is personal. This is business." I cut him off. "I'm the majority shareholder. I have a fiduciary responsibility to improve company performance. These restructuring proposals are based on objective analysis by outside consultants who have no knowledge of personal relationships. The fact that you happen to be affected is coincidental to the legitimate business purpose." It wasn't coincidental. It was the entire point. But the restructuring was legitimate enough that no one could prove otherwise. "I call for a vote," I said. "All those in favor of the proposed restructuring." I raised my hand. My 52% was all I needed. But 2 other board members, younger investors who liked the cost savings, raised their hands as well. "Motion carries," I said. Mr. Robbins, you'll receive formal notification of your position elimination by end of business today. You have 2 weeks to decide between the retirement package and the analyst position. HR will provide details. My father stood up his chair, scraping loudly. His face was red, tears actually forming in his eyes. You're doing this because of the house, because of the family situation. This is revenge, not business. Prove it, I said calmly. Take me to court. Claim wrongful termination. But you'll have to explain why eliminating an overpaid position in a legitimate restructuring is somehow illegal, just because the majority shareholder happens to be related to you. He had nothing. No response. No defense. Just the devastating realization that the daughter he'd dismissed as worthless had acquired the power to end his career with a single vote. He'd underestimated me my entire life, and now he was paying the price. He broke then fully and completely. Tears ran down his face as he stumbled toward the door. The powerful executive reduced to a broken man who'd lost everything: reputation, family, career, dignity, all gone. I watched him leave the boardroom with cold, distant eyes, feeling nothing but the satisfaction of justice served. The other board members looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Business was business. I was the majority owner. I had the legal right to restructure. That was capitalism. I gathered my papers and stood. Thank you all for your time. The formal restructuring documents will be distributed by Friday. As I walked out of that boardroom, I knew my father's world had just collapsed completely. No income, no career, no future. And I'd taken it from him using the very system he'd used to take everything from me: cold, calculated financial strategy wrapped in legal legitimacy. By early July, the dominoes had finished falling. The court ruled in my favor on every count, ordering the house transferred to my sole ownership, full restitution of the trust fund with interest and probation for my parents, in lieu of prison time conditional on complete payment, and no further contact with me. The plea deal Daniel had negotiated spared them incarceration, but nothing else. My father had no income after losing his position at Tekmanu. His reputation in the industry was destroyed. No one would hire a senior VP who'd been ousted by his own daughter after embezzling her inheritance. He'd applied to 17 positions and received 17 rejections, each one citing concerns about recent public allegations, or simply never responding at all. Their savings were gone, drained by legal fees that had topped $300,000. The restitution payments would take everything they had left. Linda's credit cards were maxed out and in collections. The house they'd lived in for 15 years, bought with my stolen money, was no longer theirs. They had 30 days to vacate. Martha told me they'd stopped answering the phone entirely because every call was either a creditor, a reporter, or a former friend calling to say they couldn't maintain the relationship given the circumstances. The social ostracism was complete. People crossed the street to avoid them at the grocery store. Their church had quietly asked them not to return. Neighbors who'd come to their parties and barbecues for years suddenly found reasons to avoid eye contact. Emily had retreated into complete isolation. Her degree revoked her reputation, destroyed her name forever linked to fraud when anyone Googled her. She'd applied to 43 jobs and received no offers. She'd been forced to move back into her childhood bedroom, unemployed and unemployable, watching her parents' marriage disintegrate around her. Because Linda and my father were barely speaking anymore. The stress had cracked open their relationship, revealing that without the facade of success and respectability, they had very little holding them together. They blamed each other constantly. Linda blamed my father for treating me so badly that I'd wanted revenge. My father blamed Linda for spoiling Emily so obviously that I'd had ammunition against them. Around and around they went, destroying what little remained of their bond. In mid-July, they moved out. A distant cousin in another state had offered them temporary housing, a spare bedroom in a modest ranch house charity from someone who pitied them but also judged them. They loaded a U-Haul with whatever belongings fit and drove away from the life they'd built on stolen foundations. No one came to say goodbye. No one helped them pack. Aunt Martha and I stood in the driveway watching them leave, Linda crying in the passenger seat. My father's face stony as he drove Emily huddled in the back, surrounded by boxes. The house they were leaving behind was now mine. All mine. The house my mother's money had purchased that I'd saved from foreclosure that they'd tried to steal. "Are you okay?" Martha asked quietly. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. We spent the next week going through the house, deciding what to keep and what to donate. Most of it held no sentimental value furniture they'd bought, decorations Linda had chosen, the trappings of a life I'd never felt part of. But when we got to my old childhood bedroom, something stopped me at the threshold. "This was the smallest room," Martha said softly. "They gave Emily the master suite and you got what was basically a converted storage closet." I walked in slowly, remembering. The walls were still the same pale blue I'd painted them at 14 using birthday money because my parents wouldn't pay for paint. The closet was tiny, barely big enough for a child's wardrobe. "Your mother used to spend time in here when she was pregnant with you," Martha said, running her hand along the wall. "She told me once she was making sure the room had good energy for her baby. I thought she was being whimsical, but maybe—" Martha paused, pressing on a panel in the closet that looked slightly different from the others. It shifted under her hand. "Wait. Crystal, help me with this." Together, we pried the panel loose. Behind it, built into the wall, was a small fireproof safe, maybe 12 inches square. I stared at it, my heart pounding. "Your mother gave me a key 35 years ago," Martha said, her voice shaking. "She made me promise to give it to you when you truly needed it. I thought it was for the trust fund documents, but those were in the bank. I'd forgotten about this until just now." She pulled a small key from her purse, something she'd apparently carried for decades, and handed it to me. My hands trembled as I inserted it into the lock. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside was a letter in a sealed envelope yellowed with age. "To my beloved Crystal, to be read when you're grown." Below it, a photo album with a blue ribbon, and wrapped in soft cloth, a delicate gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant engraved with words I could barely read through my tears. "For Crystal, you are loved eternally, Mom." I sank to the floor of that closet, holding these treasures my mother had hidden for me. Martha sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders as I opened the letter with shaking hands. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, written in fountain pen on quality stationery. My mother's words reached across 35 years to embrace me. "My precious daughter, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've grown into a woman. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for you, but I want you to know you were wanted, you were loved, you were the greatest joy of my life. I've set up a trust fund to ensure you'll always have security and opportunity. This house was meant to be yours. A place where you'll always belong. I know your father and I weren't a love match, but you were made from hope for a better future. Don't let anyone take what's rightfully yours. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. You come from strength, intelligence, and love. I'm so proud of the woman you'll become. All my love forever, Mom." I cried then. Really cried for the first time since this war had begun. Not tears of rage or pain or vindication, but tears of healing, of finally feeling loved by the one person whose love I'd craved my whole life. My mother had cherished me, had wanted me, had been proud of me before I'd even done anything to earn it. She'd loved me simply for existing, simply for being hers. Martha held me while I sobbed, decades of grief and loneliness pouring out in that tiny closet, where my mother had left me, proof of her love. I pressed the letter to my chest, along with the necklace, and whispered through my tears, "Mom always loved me. That's enough." The email came in early August, sent from Linda's account, but clearly written by all three of them. "Crystal, please. We need to talk to you one more time, face to face. We know we've lost everything, but we need you to hear us. We need you to understand. Please." I almost deleted it. Almost ignored their desperate plea like they'd ignored my pain for decades. but something in me wanted to hear what they'd say now that they'd lost everything. Wanted to see if rock bottom had taught them anything about accountability. I agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop downtown on August 5th with Martha as my witness and emotional support. I arrived early, ordered tea I wouldn't drink, and sat at a corner table with my back to the wall. Martha sat beside me, her hand finding mine under the table and squeezing gently. They arrived together, a united front of desperation. My father had aged another 10 years, his shoulders hunched, his expensive suits replaced with discount store clothing. Linda's face was puffy from crying makeup, unable to hide the dark circles under her eyes. Emily trailed behind them, thinner than I'd ever seen her, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no trace of the entitled princess she'd once been. They sat across from us, and the silence stretched for a long moment before my father finally spoke. "Crystal, we want to apologize. We know we made mistakes. We got caught up in favoritism, in bad decisions. We didn't realize how badly we were hurting you." The words sounded rehearsed, practiced in front of a mirror. "We gave you a home," he continued, and I felt Martha stiffen beside me. "We raised you, fed you, clothed you. It wasn't all bad, was it? There were good moments, family dinners, holidays." "Stop," I said, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through his rationalizations. "You're not here to apologize. You're here to make yourself feel better, to see if there's any way to salvage something from the wreckage you created." Linda started crying right on cue. "We're living in my cousin's spare bedroom, Crystal. We've lost everything. Your father can't find work. Emily can't. We just need some hope that this can end. Some sign that you might." "Might what?" I interrupted. "Forgive you. Give you money. Pretend 35 years of abuse never happened." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "You want to hear the truth? The real truth. Then listen." For the next 20 minutes, I spoke without interruption. I cataloged everything. The chores I did alone while Emily watched TV. The birthday they forgot. The scholarships I won that they dismissed. The college opportunity my father destroyed. The way they made me feel invisible, worthless, less than human. The stolen trust fund my mother left to protect me from exactly this kind of exploitation. The mortgage I paid to save them only to have them try to give away my house. The identity theft, the forged signatures, the decades of systematic emotional, financial, and psychological abuse. "You didn't just fail to love me," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. "You actively worked to destroy my sense of self-worth while stealing my inheritance. You taught me I was nothing, worth nothing, deserved nothing. And when I finally stood up for myself, you played the victim. So no, I'm not sorry you're living in a spare bedroom. I'm not sorry your reputation is destroyed. I'm not sorry you're facing consequences. You're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry you got caught." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father stared at his hands. Linda's tears had stopped, her face frozen in shock. And then Emily spoke. "They're right, you know," Emily said, turning to our parents. "She's right about all of it. We don't deserve forgiveness." My father started to protest, but Emily cut him off. "No, stop. I need to tell Crystal something, and you're going to listen." She turned to me, her eyes red but clear. "The anonymous package, the original trust fund documents, the bank memos, the evidence that sealed your case, that was me. I sent them." I felt Martha's grip on my hand tighten. I said nothing, waiting. "I found them 6 months ago, last February. I was looking for my passport in Dad's office and found this locked file cabinet. The key was taped under his desk drawer, not exactly sophisticated security." Emily's voice was steady, matter of fact. "I read everything. The real trust fund documents, the forged signatures, the bank memos about irregularities they'd buried. I sat on his office floor for an hour, just staring at proof that my whole life had been built on stolen money." "Emily, you had no right," Linda started. "I had every right to the truth." Emily's voice cracked. "I knew it was wrong, Mom. I knew we'd hurt Crystal. But reading those documents, seeing the actual evidence of what you did, it made me sick. I was terrified to confront you because you'd been controlling my whole life, telling me I deserved everything, that Crystal was just bitter and jealous. But the documents proved you were liars." And she looked back at me. "When you started fighting back in January, when you sent that first legal notice, I realized you needed those original documents to win. I copied everything, sent it anonymously because I didn't want you to think I was trying to manipulate you or buy forgiveness. I just wanted you to have the evidence to destroy them because they deserve it." The revelation hung in the air. My golden child sister had ensured our parents' downfall, had chosen truth over family loyalty, had given me the smoking gun that made my case absolutely ironclad. "I've enrolled in community college for fall semester," Emily continued. "I'm taking a full course load, paying for it myself with money from my grocery store job. I'm in therapy twice a week, dealing with the entitlement and narcissism I was raised with. I'm trying to become someone better, someone who deserves to exist in the world without causing harm." She met my eyes directly. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Crystal. I participated in hurting you. I used your identity to steal. I benefited from your stolen inheritance. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I was complicit in your abuse, and I'm going to spend years, maybe the rest of my life, trying to become worthy of calling myself your sister, even if you never want that relationship." For the first time, Emily took full responsibility. No deflection, no excuse, just raw, honest accountability. I studied her for a long moment, this woman who'd been my tormentor, and who was now possibly beginning a journey toward redemption. It didn't erase anything, didn't make the past hurt less. But it was real in a way my parents' apologies weren't. "If you truly want to change," I said to Emily, my voice calm and clear, "prove it with years of action, not words." I left that coffee shop with Martha, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk. We walked in silence for a block before she finally asked, "What are you going to do?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since the meeting ended. I had power now, complete power over their futures. I could push for maximum prison sentences instead of probation. I could continue garnishing wages and pushing them toward bankruptcy. I could give interviews to national media and ensure their names became synonymous with family fraud. I had the resources, the evidence, and the public support to destroy them utterly. But as we reached Martha's car, I realized something profound. The greatest revenge wasn't crushing them into oblivion. It was walking away as the victor while they lived with the natural consequences of their own choices. "I'm done," I said simply. "I've won. The trust fund is being repaid with interest. The house is mine. They're on criminal probation. Their reputation is destroyed. Their social standing is gone. Everything they valued more than me, money, status, respect, they've lost permanently. I don't need to do anything more. The punishment they've earned will follow them for the rest of their lives without me lifting another finger." Martha studied my face carefully. "You're letting them go." "I'm not letting them go," I corrected. "I'm choosing not to waste more of my energy on them. They'll face probation hearings, financial struggle, and social exile. That's consequence enough. I won't help them, won't forgive them, won't enable any recovery. But I also won't define the rest of my life by their dysfunction. They've taken enough from me. I won't give them my future too." What I didn't say, but what I felt deeply, was that continuing to pursue them would mean they still controlled my emotional landscape. Vengeance had been necessary to achieve justice, to reclaim what was stolen, to protect others who might be similarly abused. But dwelling on it, making it my identity, would be another kind of prison. Emily was different, though. A few days after our meeting, she sent an email. Not asking for anything, just requesting permission to occasionally send me updates on her progress, therapy milestones, community college grades, small victories in her journey toward becoming someone better. I called her back, keeping my voice neutral. "I'll read your emails, Emily, but I may not respond. You need to understand that clearly. You hurt me deeply, participated in my abuse, benefited from my stolen inheritance. Trust doesn't rebuild because someone says sorry. It rebuilds, if it ever does, through years of consistent, genuine change. I understand, Emily said quietly. But unlike them, I continued thinking of our parents. You're actually trying to change. You sent me the evidence that destroyed them. You're taking accountability, so I'll give you space to prove yourself. But you'll do it without my help, without my support, without my validation. If you genuinely become a better person, it'll be because you chose to, not because I encouraged it. If you fail, that's on you. If you succeed, that's also on you. That's fair, she said. More than fair. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said. Thank me in 5 years if you've actually changed. I hung up feeling something I hadn't expected: hope. Not for reconciliation necessarily, but for the possibility that Emily might break the cycle our parents had created, that she might become someone who could exist in the world without causing harm. It was a small door left open, not an invitation to walk through it, but an acknowledgement that it existed. The healthiest thing I could do now was build forward. I'd recovered my inheritance, claimed my house exposed the truth. Now, it was time to create the life my mother had wanted for me, not defined by trauma, but by triumph. I started planning. My consulting business was thriving, but I wanted to expand it in a new direction. I'd mentor young women escaping financially abusive families, help them navigate legal systems, show them how to build wealth and independence from nothing. I'd turn my painful expertise into tools for others' liberation. I thought about writing a book sharing my story to help people recognize financial abuse patterns and escape them. Maybe creating a nonprofit foundation in my mother's name, funding legal aid for inheritance theft victims. My identity wouldn't be the daughter who was wronged, but the woman who survived, thrived, and transformed pain into purpose. I stood in my house, my mother's house now fully mine, wearing the necklace she'd left me, and felt something settle in my chest. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. I'd won the war, but more importantly, I'd won myself back. My father had tried to erase me, but I'd emerged stronger, wealthier, more successful than he'd ever been. And I'd done it through intelligent strategy and sheer determination. But before I closed this chapter completely, there was one final thing I needed to do. The final thing I needed to do was create a real home. Not just reclaim the house I'd fought for, but build something new. Something that represented hope rather than victory over pain. I found the property in September, a gracious 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from downtown. It had large windows that filled every room with natural light, a garden that was overgrown but full of potential, and enough space for 2 people who'd both spent too many years feeling cramped by circumstances beyond their control. I bought it outright. No mortgage, no debt. Just clean ownership of a fresh start. "Martha," I said when I showed her the house for the first time, "I want you to live with me, not as a guest, as family. This is your home too for as long as you want it." She cried, of course. "Sweetheart, I couldn't impose. You're not imposing. You're the only family I've ever had who actually loved me. You stood by me when it cost you relationships with everyone else. You kept my mother's secrets safe for decades. You deserve peace and comfort, and a home where you're cherished." I took her hands. "Please say yes." She said yes. We moved in together in October, and for the first time in my life, I understood what home was supposed to feel like. Martha taught me how to make my mother's favorite recipes, a lemon cake that had been served at every Chambers family celebration, a beef stew my mother had learned from her grandmother. We cooked together in the big kitchen, Martha sharing stories about my mother I'd never heard. How she'd laughed, what books she loved, the way she'd decorated for holidays. Each story was a gift filling in the outline of a woman I'd never known, but who lived in me through genetics and the love she'd left behind. We hosted dinner parties. Martha's book club met at our house monthly, filling the living room with spirited debates about literature and laughter. I invited colleagues and friends from my consulting work, creating the community and connections I'd been too guarded to build before. The house became more than walls and rooms. It became proof that love and safety and belonging were possible. My career flourished in ways that surprised even me. The publicity from my case had brought attention, and while I'd initially worried about being known for family drama, people instead saw me as someone who'd stood up for herself with intelligence and strategic brilliance. Consulting requests flooded in, and I was selective, choosing projects that interested me and paid well. But the work that mattered most was the pro bono practice I started. I became an advisor for young women escaping financially abusive families, helping them navigate legal systems, recover stolen assets, and build independent lives. The gratitude in their eyes when I explained their legal rights, when I connected them with resources they didn't know existed, when I showed them that survival was possible, that fed something in me that money never could. In November, I founded the Second Chances Foundation, a small nonprofit providing legal aid and financial counseling for people whose families had exploited them. Daniel Chen joined the board, contributing his expertise and connections. We helped 12 families in our first 6 months, recovering over $1 million in stolen inheritances and preventing countless more thefts through education and intervention. I also started writing an anonymous blog called The Invisible Daughter, sharing my story and offering practical advice for recognizing and escaping family financial abuse. It went viral, reaching hundreds of thousands of readers who saw their own experiences reflected in mine. The messages I received were heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. People finally understanding they weren't alone, weren't crazy, weren't ungrateful for protecting themselves from family predators. One February morning, 6 months after that final confrontation, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox. Emily's handwriting my name on the envelope. I almost didn't open it, afraid it would be manipulation or excuse. But something made me carry it inside. I sat at my kitchen table in the sunlight streaming through the east windows, Martha humming while she prepared breakfast, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. I opened the letter. Emily wrote about her first semester at community college, straight A's earned honestly this time. About her promotion to assistant manager at the grocery store, learning responsibility and humility through unglamorous work. About volunteering at a women's shelter on weekends, helping other women escape situations. She was beginning to understand she'd been complicit in creating. She wrote, "I'm not the person I was. I'm not who I want to be yet, but I'm trying every day. I don't know if you'll ever want me in your life, and I've accepted that I may have lost that privilege forever. But I wanted you to know I'm working to become someone worthy of the sister I had, but never appreciated." I read the letter twice, feeling something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness that was still too far away might always be too far, but a softening, an acknowledgement that real change was possible, that Emily was doing the hard work without expectation of reward or reconciliation. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer next to my mother's letter in its protective sleeve. 2 letters from 2 very different sources representing the past and the possibility of future. I smiled slightly and whispered to myself, maybe someday. The ending of this story wasn't about perfect reconciliation or happily ever after family reunions. It was about me choosing my own path forward, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me, doing work that mattered, and leaving the door open to healing without forcing it. I'd won the battle for justice. Now I was winning the more important battle, building a life defined not by trauma, but by triumph. Crystal looked out her window at the garden she was planting, the home she'd created, and the future she was building entirely on her own terms. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you for staying with me through Crystal's entire journey. Her story reminds us that standing up for ourselves isn't selfish, it's necessary. That justice, even when it's difficult, is worth fighting for. And that healing is possible even from the deepest family wounds. If Crystal's story resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel. We share true stories about resilience, justice, and triumph over adversity. Stories that matter to women who've lived long enough to understand that life isn't always fair, but we can still fight to make it right. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who wronged you? Do you think Crystal made the right choices? Was her revenge justified, or did she go too far? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your stories and wisdom help create a community where we support each other through difficult family dynamics. Until next time, remember you deserve respect, honesty, and love, even from family. Especially from family.